CoCo Crew Podcast is hosted by Cyber Ears. If you are serious about your podcast hosting needs, you should check out Cyber Ears. Whether you are a podcaster, a radio host, a musician, a narrator, an audiobook author, or simply a school, church, corporation, or anyone else with an audio recording that needs to be hosted or distributed, you should check out cyberears.com. Unlimited bandwidth, fast, reliable, and rugged servers with no hidden fees. Cyber Ears, your audio, your terms.
It's a blast from the past.
Please listen carefully.
CoCo.
Welcome to the CoCo Crew Podcast. A delicious adventure into the world of retro computing news and information. Featuring the Tandy Color Computer.
Hey, you got your CoCo 3 yet?
CoCo.
All right, welcome CoCo Cruisers. You are here at episode 30. Wow, 30. Did you ever think we'd get this far, Neil?
No, I didn't. I can't believe it's 30 already.
30
episodes.
months.
31.
So yeah, 31 episodes. That's true.
Wow.
But I mean, I know CoCo talks up to like episode 104 or something like that. But since we do a monthly show, our numbers to represent a little bit longer period of time.
It shows it's time for a CoCo midlife crisis.
Oh, Lord. Well, so, of course, now we've got everyone in there. I, of course, am John Linville, and we're joined by our regular co-host, Neil Blanchard. Hello, Neil.
Everyone.
And Mike Rowan, or Myro. How you doing, Myro?
Hi, I'm doing good.
And becoming our regular co-host, Mr. Boise Pete. How you doing, Boise?
Good, but I will always want to sit back in the corner and watch.
I've heard that about you. Anyway, so as I said, we're back here. This is CoCo Crew Podcast. We're back for episode 30. We're getting excited. The Tandy Assembly is now roughly 11 months away. Tandy Assembly, 11 months away. Tandy Assembly 2018. Of course, it's only 1 month away in the rearview mirror, but, that's the way it works. We call that clock math. But, of course, that means CoCo Fest. CoCo Fest, yes, the one and only, the last CoCo Fest is only 5 months away. Very exciting. Going to be the big spring event. I know we're all excited about that. Everyone excited about CoCo Fest?
Absolutely.
Definitely, yeah.
Good, clean fun, mostly. All right. Well, so who's got a project that they're working on? Anyone do anything fun? All right.
We're always doing fun things. I know I'm on the list for a Games Master cart, but I got impatient, so I ordered some parts and am going to start playing with the sound chip here.
That's cool.
Shortly, so that'll be fun.
Yeah. I'm. That's partly my fault there. I've been overrun with work lately, and then part of the free time has been eaten up trying to officiate the Retro Challenge event, which I still haven't quite finished. I kind of did comments on everyone's project, but I still haven't picked winners. I guess I need to do that. But yeah, that's taken most of my time lately. I've thought about some other projects, but it's kind of like a wish in one hand and think in the other kind of thing, or something like that. How about you, Neil? You doing anything concrete?
Well, I ordered some parts to build a smaller version XT IDE adapter.
Oh yeah.
I want to put one in the Tandy 1000 HX, so it's not really CoCo related, but it is Tandy.
Well, that's not bad. How about you, Boise? Anything?
Not really anything different than last time we talked. I did, though, send Mike version of DriveWire for the Mac that Linda and I were working on. Mike, did you get that?
Yeah, I've got it. I haven't had a chance to spin it up and play with it. It's on my short list as well. So I'm looking forward to that because I like using it on my Mac, and the last Java versions just don't behave properly.
So anyway, that's kind of the last thing that I touched.
Well, that's cool. I know Boise is getting ready for the last rounds of his PhD, earning his PhD. So I'm sure we all understand him having a little bit shortness of free time there.
Yeah, I'm actually taking off the entire month of December to focus on comprehensive exams in the spring. So
awesome. So what about acquisitions? Anybody got anything new lately? Fun, interesting? I got a couple of they're CoCo cassettes, but they come from the land of the dragon. That seems to it's not a bad place to look for cassette software for your Dragon. They seem to have a lot of it, whereas we have almost no original software pop up over this side. But amongst all their Dragon cassettes, sometimes a few of them are actual CoCo cassettes too. So I've been picking up a few here and there. I think the latest one was Crazy Painter, which looks kind of cool.
That's cool.
But yeah, that's I also picked up a book. This is called Things to Do with Your TRS-80 Color Computer from 1983. It's kind of a goofy book, but I don't know. I thought it was fun. So I'll just let you know that I'm buying those stuff. So in case you've got a goofy CoCo book out there, put it up for sale. And if nobody else buys it, I probably will. So
it'll end up in your library.
Yeah. So who else? Anybody else pick up anything cool?
Nothing for me this month. I guess just coming off of Tandy Assembly, I've tried to catch my breath a little bit. But Christmas is coming.
Yeah, Christmas is coming.
I've been watching eBay. The deluge of CoCos, even CoCo 3s, is still pretty high on that. So there's a lot to choose from.
Yep. A lot of good stuff out there. If anybody on the CoCo list is desperate to adopt me and start showering me with gifts, I'd be happy to accept them. I'll send you my address. Oh, Lord. Well, that's probably a good introduction then. So why don't we take a little break, and then we'll hear from our sponsors, and then we'll be back with some announcements.
I'll never forget landing at O'Hare and the cab ride to Lombard. When I checked in at the hotel, there were already people in the lobby eagerly discussing the CoCo. I recognized people I had never met in person, some by their faces, others by their voice. I couldn't have imagined how meeting people that shared the same passion would rekindle and re-energize me. So many ideas and experiences. Some of the people I met there became lifelong friends. Oh, wait. None of that happened because I never made the decision to go. Haven't you waited long enough? CoCo Fest. For reservations, call 630-629-1500 and ask for the special CoCo Fest room rate. CoCo Fest is April 21st and 22nd in Lombard, Illinois. CoCo Fest. Make it your own. Bring marvelous music to life through your CoCo. MIDIize your CoCo with ColOrchestra. The ColOrchestra cartridge allows you to connect MIDI synthesizers to your CoCo and compose music in real time. Overlay up to 8 tracks of synthesizer sound. Record as you play, edit individual notes, transpose tracks, mix each track independently. And with 8,000 note storage capability, you have enough power to produce the most demanding music compositions. ColOrchestra works from cassette or disc. Navigation is a breeze through simple-to-use menus and graphic icons. Each ColOrchestra cartridge is fabricated from solid walnut, hand-finished, and the entire board is plated in 7mm gold. The complete package includes hardware, sequencing software, professional ring-bound documentation, and 2 MIDI cables. You get professional features found in much more expensive MIDI systems for just $149.95. Finally, the music in your head can become reality with ColOrchestra from Horizon Software. Add $3 shipping, $2 for COD. Louisiana residents add 7.8% sales tax. Horizon Software Corporation, Opelousas, Louisiana.
Okay, welcome back, CoCo Cruisers. And now it's time for our announcements. You're listening to the CoCo Crew Podcast. We are available on Twitter with the handle at CoCo Crew Podcast. That's CoCoCrewPodcast. All one word, at CoCo Crew Podcast. So if you are a tweeter, if you like to tweet, hit us up. Nowadays, I hear that you can use 280 characters instead of just 140. So you may be able to express a full, complete thought. Although, judging from some people I know, that may not be enough. But you give us your best shot and send us a tweet on the Twitter.
Yeah, more isn't always better.
Yeah, that's right. We are, of course, also available on the Facebook. We have a group called the CoCo Crew Podcast. That's 4 separate words, the CoCo Crew Podcast. Just search for us. I'm sure you'll be able to find us. If you're looking for the audio from the show, of course, we are available on iTunes and Google Play. We are also available for streaming via Stitcher and TuneIn. So there are plenty of ways to get the show audio. Just check us out. Of course, if you just go to cococrew.org, you can pick up the RSS feed from there with your normal podcatcher if you're all hardcore and techie like that. The CoCo Crew Podcast is a member of the Throwback Network. The Throwback Network, of course, is a list of somewhat like-minded retro-themed podcasts centered around 80s culture, including 80s technology, video games, home computers, and some other quirky stuff like, the Greatest American Hero TV show and, and other stuff. If you're looking for another podcast and some way to use your time and you're into retro, I recommend you check out the Throwback Network. Similarly, we are a member of the Game by Game Podcast Information Hub. There's also a list of somewhat like-minded podcasts. The podcasts on the Game by Game Podcast Information Hub are concentrated on home computers and home video game consoles from the 80s. Maybe some 90s in there as well. So more technology oriented. If that floats your boat, then I recommend if you're looking for another podcast, you check out the Game by Game Podcast Information Hub. Audio for the CoCo Crew Podcast is, of course, hosted at Cyber Ears. If you're looking for a place to host audio for your podcast or whatever other needs you have for hosting audio on the internet, we recommend you check out Cyber Ears, where you will get your audio on your terms. If you'd like to reach the CoCo Crew hosts, we have some email addresses set up. For reaching all of at least the regular hosts, we have available show, that's SHOW at cococrew.org. Podcast, PODCAST at cococrew.org. Or feedback, FEEDBACK at cococrew.org. If for some reason you'd like to send email but only reach one of the hosts, then I'm available as John, JOHN, at cococrew.org. Neil is available as Neil, NEIL, at cococrew.org. And Mike, of course, is available as Mike, MIKE, at cococrew.org. I think I might have even thrown in a Boise, BOISY, at cococrew.org just to surprise someone, but I'm not sure. But if you want to reach Boise, give it a try.
Nice.
All right. Show now, Boise.
All right. That concludes our normal round of podcasts, announcements, rather. But, of course, we'd like to announce events of interest that we believe that our listeners would take an interest in. So coming up, still in the month of November, it's getting pretty close now when we record this. Might be too late by the time you hear it, but if nothing else, you may want to check out for next year Free Play Florida. In this case, Free Play Florida 2017 being held on November 17th to 19th of 2017, and that is being held at the Doubletree by Hilton Orlando at SeaWorld in Orlando, Florida. That's That sounded sloppy. At SeaWorld in Orlando, Florida. Sound okay to everyone? Yeah, okay. Sounds like a cool event. I wish I could have made it, but I don't think I'm going to make it there. Actually, at this point, I was probably just laziness in preparation for Thanksgiving, real Thanksgiving. Anyway,
I thought you were going to treat yourself to that one for your birthday.
I was thinking about it, but it's just getting a little too late, and I just didn't make the plans. One of these days, I'm going to take one of these trips or for my birthday, and everyone else be damned, but not this time. Anyway, next on the agenda, World of Commodore. That's we've got that listed as December 9th to 10th, 2017, being held in the Canadian city of Toronto. This is primarily Commodore events. This is associated with the TPUG. I'm not sure, Toronto something users group, maybe. Toronto Pet Users Group. There you go. Anyway, Neil, what else would we say about the Commodore event here? It's a good place to go see Commodore computers and maybe some other stuff.
Definitely, yep. And there will be some CoCo present because Jim Brain will be there. He'll be selling his CoCo wares. All
right, Mr. Brain, definitely a big star, especially in the Commodore community as well as our own. So, very cool. All right, flipping the year, coming up February 10th through 11th of 2018, we have VCF, Vintage Computer Festival Pacific Northwest, being held at the Living Computer Museum and Labs in Seattle, Washington. So if you're in or around the Pacific Northwest part of the United States and you're interested in vintage computing, I recommend you get out to Seattle for this event. This is an inaugural event from the Vintage Computer Festival. They have events on the East Coast and other places around the country, but Chicago and Georgia. Anyway, should be a cool event. I'm not going to make it because it's too far away. But if you're on that side of the country, the side of the United States or even Canada, then maybe you should go check it out. That is, again, the VCF Pacific Northwest, and it's being held February 10th through 11th, 2018. Next on the docket, this is my part of town, February 17th and 18th, 2018, the Playthrough Gaming Convention 2018 being held in Raleigh, North Carolina. Come to the Raleigh Convention Center and check out the gaming event. The website shows a bunch of people sitting at PCs. I'm not sure what they're doing, playing some sort of game, but it seems like a cool event. Lots of gaming, various kinds of gaming, but video games, card games, everything in between. I'm pretty sure there'll be some cosplayers if you're into furries and that sort of stuff.
Okay.
This one is really close to me. I probably should go. I'm not going to promise that I will, but if you're going, let me know. Maybe we can meet up for a beer. How about that? All right. And that brings us to in April 21st to 22nd, 2018, the 27th annual Last Chicago CoCo Fest. Again, they call it the last, not because there'll never be another one, but because we don't know if there'll ever be another one. So for now, it's the last Chicago CoCo Fest. I know Boise loves that little joke.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is our big event. This is the event we all got to know each other going to every year. Lots of CoCo stuff, lots of CoCo people. If you're a serious member of the CoCo community, this should be on your agenda, especially if you're anywhere near the Midwest part of the United States. Be there or be square. Who else has something to say about CoCo Fest? Neil, go.
You definitely want to be there. If you're into the CoCo, it's the place to be.
Awesome.
If you're not there, you don't really love the CoCo.
That's right. Pretty sure you're a communist or something. I'm not sure.
And here's what I have to say about the Cocoa Fest. Touch the heron.
Touch the heron. That's right. If you want to see the inspiration for the Heron Inn or Heron Point Inn in Forest of Doom, then make your way to Lombard, Illinois for the 27th annual Last Chicago Cocoa Fest, April 21st to 22nd, 2018.
Owe it to yourself, and you're not getting any younger.
Yeah, that's right. You're definitely not getting any younger. So go be awesome. Be retro. All right. Rounding out our event schedule, our event announcements. Coming up in July of 2018, July 16th through 22nd, Kansas Fest 2018. This is the Apple II event held in the dormitories of Rockhurst University, which is in Kansas City, Missouri. It's a week-long event. It's a pretty cool retro event. Lots of good technical content, lots of good people content, hanging out. It is Apple II oriented, beyond oriented. It is an Apple II event. They are pretty nice people. If you show up to want to talk about your other retro computers, they'll probably tolerate you at least for a little while. So anyway, if that sounds appealing to you, then I recommend it. So why don't you try and get out there to Kansas City in July. You'll love it. Very comfortable weather. Extremely hot. Anyway, all right. Well, that is the end of our announcements. So we're going to take another break, and we'll be back with some news.
No, Mom's gonna do the turkey. Yeah, Dad wants ambrosia, so I guess we gotta get those miniature marshmallows. And I'll do the crescent rolls, and you do the cranberries. You know I can't cook. Oh. Yeah, well, I'll see you tomorrow then. Gobble, gobble. Oh, bye-bye.
You know what's going on again at Radio Shack? That's right, honey. It's Tandy's Sweet System Sale. You get a Tandy Color Computer 3 with a dual FD501 disk drive system and your choice of either a DMP105 printer or a DCM212 modem for just $599. Most folks' $599 deal is not a system, honey.
These Apple disk drives are just $5.99.
That's not a system. Radio Shack is the place for a full system. Tandy's Sweet System Sale. Come and get it while it lasts, because it will not last long. Love that cocoa from Tandy.
All right, welcome back, CoCo Cruisers. Now it's time for some news. Starting off strong this month with some news. Our usual hero of the MC10 world. We've got some releases from Jim Gary. He'll start off the news, and he'll be back a little bit later, a time or two as well. So, first one is Binary Room for the MC10. This is a port to the MC10 of Binary Room by Taisuke Fukuno, a super fun puzzle game. If you check out the YouTube link, he's got another link to the original that it comes from. I have no idea. I hope there's instructions. I don't understand what the puzzle is going on here, but it looks like a cool way to spend a little while distracting yourself from real world worries. So,
name too.
Binary Room.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't quite get it, but hey, it looks fun. All right, moving on. The next one, also from Jim. This one is called MC Clue. And just looking at the video playing, it mentions a candlestick in their lounge, a dining room, and a Colonel Mustard. I'm guessing that this is an MC10. Actually, this is for the color computer. The color computer version of the classic board game Clue. I know many of us have spent some time wasting away playing Clue on paper or on the board or whatever. And so it looks like a good way to incorporate your color computer hobby into your gaming hobby. What do you think, Neil? You going to check this out the next time you feel like playing Clue?
Yeah, I definitely will, actually. I used to play the console versions, so it'd be kind of neat to see this, and especially it's all done in BASIC.
Yeah.
Must be a lot of BASIC code.
Must be. So it's probably pretty fun. If nothing else, it won't say no. So if you want to play Clue, you always have someone to play with. All right, so rounding out the top three here for the starters, another one from Mr. Gary. He's got a game called Dante's Run, which he describes as a Xevious-like game in BASIC, which he did as part of his Retro Challenge entry. The game is Halloween themed, inspired by the game TAI for the ZX81, and also from Xevious for the NEC PCs, the NEC PC 6001. The PC 6001 that uses the same chip, same video chip as the CoCo, right? I think so.
Yeah.
So, anyway, Xevious is a cool game, and so this is Jim's implementation of it for. Let's see, was this for the CoCo or for the? No, this is for an MC10.
MC10, yeah.
So very cool. So
yeah, lots of skulls scrolling through there. I like how that's held throughout the game. It's pretty neat looking.
So pretty cool. All right. So moving on. Here's one I think is pretty neat. It's from a Chris Osborne. Another one of those where I'm not a huge fan of 3D printing, but I can recognize when people do something interesting and new with the 3D printer. And so a lot of us at one time or another have faced a problem with old electronics equipment of where you have a broken belt. And this hits hits the cassette players, and it hits some of the floppy drives, and probably a few other things that, where motors turn and that sort of stuff. But what tends to happen is these little rubber belts that were cheap 30 or 40 years ago, then you set them somewhere where they get a little too hot or sit a little too long. If you're lucky, all they do is dry out and break, lose their elasticity. If you're not lucky, they kind of disintegrate into a black goo.
That's awful.
It is.
Yeah. Either way, even if you deal with a black goo problem, you still have to replace the belt. And it's always a little tricky because you can't always just measure, because sometimes you want a certain amount of tension on the belt. So if you get a belt that actually fits the two pulleys, it may not really hold as tense as it ought to, or whatever. I don't know. There's a little bit of magic or art in picking the right belt. Plus, sometimes the shape can be important. Some of them are flat, some of them are square, or, whatever. So anyway, this was kind of an innovative use of a 3D printer. This guy's, I think, I'm trying to read here. I think he is using, he's using something called Ninja Flex. I'm not really sure what that is. I assume that's some kind of plastic filament, presumably maybe something that's kind of stretchy. But he's printed a belt out of it, and is using it to repair. In this case, he's repairing the cassette player portion of a Commodore PET. But I suggested that a similar technique could be used for repairing Tandy cassette players, and any kind of disk drive you might have that has a problem. I know not CoCo, but if you get the floppy disks for the Model 100, those are belt driven and definitely are known for the problems of having the belts go bad. So somebody might be able to adapt this idea to that technique, and work something out. And if not, well, at least you learn something.
Or what the longevity would be with this printing a belt solution. Kind of cool.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's plastic. I'd guess. Well, I have no idea about the material, so who knows? It might not be any better, but at least it's good for now.
Yeah, oh, definitely. Yeah.
So, all right, moving on to the next one. Really, the next two. The next one first is an announcement from Per Surratt on the worldofdragon.org forums. It says, it says new game for the CoCo Dragon, Tiburon, which then has in parentheses shark. So I'm guessing that Tiburon is probably Spanish for shark. Wonder if I can validate that here. Well, Tiburon is the name of some some places in California and whatever else. Anyway, so Prayer's written a new game. So let's see, does it have a description of the game? Something between an arcade adventure game. Had to be short enough to be played into the end in less than an hour. So anyway, this is original announcement was for the Dragon. Looks like there's a pretty good discussion of it on the forums out there at World of Dragon. And then the next link is also from Pear announcing the same game, but on the mailing list for the CoCo mailing list. So this game targets both the CoCo and the Dragon, which is a great way to do things. And Pear has announced it both on the Dragon forums, which are a long-going, strong community there, and on the CoCo mailing list. So he's communicating in a number of places. I just thought that was cool, so I've included both links. So crazy or not, I don't know. What do you think?
I think it's good because the CoCo and the Dragon link.
That's right. Keep us all together. Still can't. Okay. Spanish tiburon with an accent on the O. Shark.
Get a lot of interest in the Dragon forums there, I notice.
Yeah. Very cool. All right, moving on. The next one, 6809 microprocessor kit. This is from someone whose name I'm probably pretty sure I'm not able to pronounce correctly, but I'll try as Vishit Sirichote, who knows?
Okay.
Vishit Sirichote, I don't know. I'm pretty sure if you're listening, you probably know I'm trying to say your name. Why don't you send me an email or an audio link or something and tell me how I'm messing it up. So anyway, you got a 6809 base. It's a little computer. It's like almost like an old style trainer board. It's got a keyboard included that has basically a hex keypad and a few command keys. Comes with 7 segment displays and an expansion connector as well as a serial port. I don't know. There was a little discussion of it. Some people had seen it for sale on eBay and were talking about it on Facebook. And he had published this website talking about it, where he gives you an overview of the kit that he's offering, as well as some design stuff and even some software at the bottom. There's a link. In fact, he even has a PDF programming book for 6809 kit. So anyway, he's selling kits on eBay for about $130, I think. And if you're looking for something other than a CoCo, something that's more education oriented than a CoCo, or if you're looking for something that's got a serial port hanging off of it, but you still want to do 6809 code, this might be for you. I don't know, or it may be terrible. I have no idea. I haven't got one. I did order one. Haven't received it yet. So I'll probably, if it's worthwhile, I'll probably be talking about it in the future. I am thinking maybe it'd be a suitable thing to port, say, Color Basic to. So if you want to program in Basic and use it to control LEDs or motors or something, maybe this would be a good conduit for that, and you can save your CoCo for playing Megabug or whatever. What do you think, Mike? You up for this kind of machine?
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I'm probably going to wait till you get yours since you've ordered one, see what it's about. I'm interested in how it compares to like the Heathkit trainer.
Yeah, I do think it looks similar. The guy actually offers a number of these that are basically the same form factor, almost the same kind of design, but with different processors. And he's got them to use like the 6802. He's got, I think there's one for 6502. I think he's got one for the 8080 and one for the 8800 or 8088 rather. Anyway, if you're into microprocessors and want a familiar pro platform to play with them, it might be more suitable depending on what you want to do than trying to track down every old 80s computer that used a different processor. But whether or not that's as much fun, I'm not so sure. But to each his own.
Doesn't take as much space, you know?
That's probably true. Well, anyway, might be a cool toy to play with, or it might be a cool gift to get for Christmas. Too bad I ordered mine, but again, if you want to buy me something, do reach out. I'll be happy to give you my address. Oh, Lord. All right.
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone! Yay!
Moving on. The next link, CMOC, C-Like compiler, now supports modular compilation and linking. This, of course, is from Pierre Serzin. So Pierre keeps plugging along on this compiler. Again, he still calls it C-Like. I haven't really dug in that much to see how C-Like or not C-Like it is. Seems like I always end up with a podcast to do or or something else that keeps me from digging too deeply into some of this stuff. But he does continue to make progress, and he's now moved out to the stage where he builds object files that can be linked together. It appears to be a competent tool. I know it can be used for producing binaries not only for the CoCo but also for the Vectrix, and I'm not sure if he's targeting anything else at this point, but it's looks like a pretty cool tool. I know some people are using it, and I really haven't seen anybody complain about it. I've seen a few people say, well, it doesn't do this or that I need for whatever I'm doing, but they're mostly kind of esoteric things that, while those persons may in fact need it for what they're doing, it doesn't mean that you need it for whatever else. So your mileage may vary in that sense. But again, it looks like a cool tool. Have you ever looked at CMOC any there, Boise?
Actually, I started playing with it a little bit on my Mac, and it looks pretty cool. We've been needing a C compiler for a while. The only thing, I don't think it emits OS 9 executables.
Yeah, I don't think it does that. I don't know if it does position independent at all.
I don't know.
But, if not, that'd probably be a nice way for it to grow. Anyway, well, cool. All right, moving on to the next link. Another Jim Gary entry. In this case, rather than a video link, this is a web page link for his Retro Challenge entry. And specifically, his last game he programmed for Retro Challenge was a port of Gotcha. Gotcha was an old Atari arcade game, and it's one with probably one of the least politically correct promotional flyers that you'll ever see.
Oh yeah.
if you look at the page, you can see a copy of the image there, and it's got a young lady looking to be having a little too much fun in a, shall we say, lightly clad, very small amount of clothing, and a kind of preppy looking dude following behind her, but with his hands on her hips, trying to guide her in a way that, by modern taste may look a little rapey, actually, but I don't know. I suspect you wouldn't get away with an ad like this in modern times. So whether that's good or bad is for you to judge. But anyway, so nice to see an implementation in Gotcha. Like I said, it was one of the things that I enjoy about the Retro Challenge stuff is seeing all these guys go out and do the various projects, and they do them well. And some of them do really in-depth projects, and some people do kind of really, full breadth kind of projects. And I'd say that's kind of where Jim was, where he did, of course, he does full implementations of the various games, but he went out and did like 8 games in a month or something. And so that's pretty cool. So anyway, go check that out. And if you're an MC10 person, then try out his games and have some fun. You got your MC10 plugged in and trying out the Jim Gary collection there, Neil?
Oh, but you know what? I keep meaning to actually get a hook back up. I mean, there's so many titles for that machine now.
Yeah.
I'm way behind.
And they're all from Jim Gary.
Yeah.
One of them, yeah.
Oh, that's funny. All right. Well, the next link. This is an announcement of CoCo Flash Mass Flasher software suite. So Mass Flasher, that sounds a little wrong, but I guess what he's talking about is being able to program multiple images at once on the CoCo Flash cartridge from Jim Brain. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
So the code that comes with CoCo Flash, I guess it only programs one ROM image at a time, even though there's space for like 8,000 images or something.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, you have to do one by one.
Okay, and so
not bad if you're going to do a few, but if you want to actually load this thing right up, I mean, that would take hours.
Yeah, so it's human interaction plus just anytime in a computer when you kind of separate similar events into a collection of events instead of kind of one big event, it always takes a little bit longer that way. So, so this is mostly for efficiency. Then it's to be able to kind of blast program this stuff on the CoCo Flash.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Cool.
Flash Masher would also be a good name.
Flash, that would be a good name.
Yeah, you might want to consider that, changing that from Mass Flasher to Flash
Masher. That would be a cool name. Mass Flasher. Again, that kind of sounds like Gotcha there a little bit. It sounds like something maybe you shouldn't be doing.
A little rapey, yeah.
Yeah.
At least he didn't call it Master Flasher.
Yeah. So anyway, this of course comes from someone on the mailing list who seems to refer to himself as my email. Of course, we know from the email address itself that this is Mr. Reitveld. Mr. Reitveld, I do wish you would check into your mail client and see if you could adjust your mail client so it actually has your real name, or at least a name, rather than just calling it my email. That sounds suspiciously like a default setting. All right. Well, anyway, moving on. So this one is a little sad. For those of us who believe in preserving the history of computers, now these aren't microcomputers like most of us are interested in, but still, it's the title of the story is "Loss of Hewlett-Packard Archive: A Wake-Up Call for Computer Historians." And so, let's see, it says 100 boxes of correspondence, speeches, and other documents created by William Hewlett and David Packard as they built the company considered to be the grandfather of what we think of as Silicon Valley, were burned to ash by the recent Sonoma County fires. And so it sounds like they were stored in a building that was just kind of off on the edge of a parking lot or something like that. And, they get these wildfires out there in California from time to time, and some of them have then wiped out these historical records. There's a little bit of uproar about it or whatever, because apparently they had been stored somewhere a little, more appropriate for historical records, and then someone had recently moved them to this, like you said, this garage or whatever they were sitting in. And anyway, fate struck and now they're gone. But it's a reminder, for those of us participating in the retro hobby. I mean, some of us are in it just for the kicks of nostalgia or whatever, but a lot of us do value the history for the history's sake. And so, protect your stuff. If you have some interesting documents or rare or hard to find stuff, do consider putting it, putting stuff in fireproof storage and or storing stuff offsite, and maybe making copies of things and whatever. I mean, some of that we talk about scanning software images or whatever and getting them up on the archive, or scanning the manuals and getting them up on archive.org or the Color Computer Archive or something like that. We also had that a while back where they had the big fire up in the mountains of North Carolina there that took out that site that had a retro computer museum. Though I hear those guys have a new site now and are hoping to reopen. Anyway, hopefully that'll be a news item before too long. Anyway, I'm rambling, so let's get on to another Jim Geary announcement. So we've got two links here that they're both, I think, for the same game. We've got one called Gold Hunt. There's a version of Gold Hunt for the ZX81 by Dr. Beep. Of course, we all know Dr. Beep, right? Anyway, it's again for the MC10, written in BASIC, works in 4K with no RAM pack needed. So somehow you're collecting gold bars, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, it looks like a pretty cool little, MC10 game. And then the second video is an update, which I guess, let's see, thanks to Johan Coleman for the suggestion to keep working on Gold Hunt until I had the mechanic more like the original. So I guess he made some improvements to Gold Hunt, and so issued a new video. Anyway, that's Jim does that sometimes. He works on the games and has multiple announcements, as we all do, I guess. But it's kind of unusual in some ways. Jim cranks his stuff out so fast that he usually doesn't have time for an update.
Gobble, gobble.
All right. Well, let's see. Moving on. The next link. This is from Joe Schutz. Don't really know Joe. Do you guys know Joe? I think I've seen his email
just from the list here and there
all the time. But anyway, well, his title: 83,797 MIDI files. ... Apparently, he's been sending MIDI files to the Guillaume at the Color Computer Archive, and so now there's a whole bunch of them there. So if you enjoy listening to MIDI or doing MIDI performances or whatever, if you're looking for MIDI content, of course, that MIDI is a music standard. It's almost like the electronic version of sheet music. If you're interested in finding MIDI files for playing music, sounds like Color Computer Archive may be a good place to go look. So very cool. Thanks, Joe. Cool to be made aware of that. All right. So let's see. A couple of weeks ago, CoCo Talk had the launch party for Forest of Doom. Forest of Doom is a text adventure game that was started 30 years ago by Bruce Moore, and then packed away with his CoCo as he got older and found other interests. And then a year or two ago, his brother got him a CoCo at a thrift store of some sort, and he found his Forest of Doom source code from back in the day, and then started tinkering with it and kind of finished out the game. And so he released it in early November, had a release party on the CoCo Talk. Fate struck, and the normally live CoCo Talk wasn't able to be live due to technical difficulties or whatever. So they recorded it instead and published it just through YouTube and their podcast audio or whatever. Anyway, point being, if you've heard of Forest of Doom and you're waiting on it, you should wait no more. It is available. And if you want more information about Forest of Doom, you should then check out the video at the link in the show notes. So what do you think there, Mike? You picked up Forest of Doom yet?
No, I'm not a Dungeons and Dragons kind of guy. I did see the video. There's some interesting features to the game that I saw, but no, just not my genre of interest.
Yeah. I hemmed and hawed. I ended up getting the book, but so he's got kind of a unique release. I don't know if it's supposed to be anti-piracy or if it's just because he wanted to write a book or what. But he's written a book that's kind of like an extended play manual or whatever for the game. And so you order the book through lulu.com, which is a print-on-demand service. And inside the book is a URL for downloading a disk image of the game. And that's how you get the game. So basically you buy the book and you get the game for free, I guess. A little value-added thing there. Anyone else? Neil, you've checked this out, right?
I did. Yeah, I was. Actually, Bruce sent me a review copy, which I'm going to probably do a review on this month.
Cool.
Yeah, for the game. So the book's nice. Have you had a chance to read it yet, John?
I've looked through some of it. I mean, it's only about 50 pages, but so not overwhelming. I've been, like I said, buried by work recently, but I've looked through some of it. It's some nice credits there in the beginning. It's credits us and some other folks in the community for inspiring or contributing to the book or to the game in various ways. So that's kind of cool. Anyway, so part of if you watch the launch party, you'll hear about how he had a mug available that he was reserving as a prize for the first person to complete the Forest of Doom game on any difficulty level. And so then if we go to the next link, congratulations to Paul Fiscarelli for being the first to complete the Forest of Doom. And of course, that was in less than a week after the release. I don't know if Mr. Fiscarelli is just exceptionally good at these adventures or if there's a little luck involved or what. Anyway, if you're hoping to win the mug, you're not going to win it.
You missed it.
I want to add that I look forward to Bruce's second installment of this game called Forest of Gump.
Where you must battle the fried shrimp, boiled shrimp etouffee. Anyway,
but what about running another contest?
Well,
where you have to beat the game on the harder levels.
Yeah, well, so he is talking about having another contest. I guess so. So, like for example, the Lulu.com print on demand sounded great, except that for whatever reason, like Neil, I know your book was printed in Raleigh, which was like an hour for me.
Right.
And sent to Canada. my book that I ordered on the first day it was available was printed in Massachusetts and took a week and a half to get to me.
yeah, that makes no sense.
And so a lot of people, I think, were more in my situation. So, I mean, Paul Fiscarelli had already won the contest before I ever even got my book. And I think a lot of people were in the same situation as me. So Bruce was talking about having another contest of some sort. I don't think he's actually spelled that out yet. So, stay tuned and we'll see what comes out of that.
What's strange is that usually everything comes slow to Canada through mail. And yet this came like lightning.
So, Oh, well.
Even Bruce couldn't believe it. He goes, you have that already?
So, all right, well, moving on. So those of you who've been following the Facebook group may be aware that Paul Thayer has been offering basically a clone of the cell phone game called Timberman that runs on the CoCo 3. So the link in the show notes here is, again, he sent out just a reminder that Timberman is ready for pre-order, and so email him at the address he gives. A little farther down, and you can see that his offering. So he's offering Timberman on a SD card that I guess is intended to be put into a CoCo SD to actually read the disk image off of that. And then he's including with it a colorful stapled manual. So anyway, sounds like if you're interested in obtaining the game that they are still available. So you may want to reach out to Paul and see what you can get. And, he said it looks pretty good. It's a game that looks good, I think, with the CoCo 3 style of graphics. I remember when I first saw Timberman on the cell phone, that's something I thought, hey, maybe that'd be cool on the CoCo 3. So I guess Paul thought the same thing. So anyway, all right, moving on. So from Guillaume Major, CoCo SEC Explorer 0.40 is now available. So those of us who have CoCo SEC, many of us are now using this program, CoCo SEC Explorer, which is just a program that makes it a little bit easier to navigate the CoCo SDC and mount disk images and that sort of thing. If you're using CoCo SDC Explorer, you may want to consider upgrading now to 0.40. What do you think, Mike? Did you get your CoCo SDC Explorer updated?
Not yet, but it'll be in the list.
Cool. All right.
I seriously have to. I can't believe I'm going to admit this right on the air here, but I have to try this program still. I mean, I'm still typing all these commands.
Oh, yeah.
Going through, disk images and folders. And I mean, this just simplifies things.
I can imagine. I've been I use it some. I'll be honest, I'm not a huge CoCo SDC user. Because, a lot of times when I'm using CoCo, it's code I've written for myself, and I kind of load up different ways. But when I do use a CoCo SDC, it is convenient to be able to use the Explorer to do things. And it's it's a pretty cool tool, and it kind of enables people to put together larger disk images for the SD cards that then, it's kind of as a service to others to help them kind of utilize what's in the archive. So that's pretty cool.
What? Just real quick question: how does the CoCo SDC Explorer compare with Logical?
I think I'm not really sure. It's been a while since I've used any Logical. I think there's less single key commands with the SDC Explorer. All right. Okay, well, moving on to our last news item. So we're closing. We started with Jim Gary, and we're closing out with Jim Gary. This is a recent announcement. Now he's got a port of the game Baccarat, which I guess is a casino game. I've never played Baccarat. I've heard of it, I think, in James Bond movies.
Definitely, yeah.
So This says by Jeff Wells from my old hometown, Hamilton. I think that's some Canadian place. I've added a little color and some fixes so it will work for the TRS-80 MC10, originally published in 1983 in Color Computer News. So if you want to try your hand at Baccarat, or maybe you're an old hand, I figure right about this time is where Mike announces that he used to be world champion at Baccarat back in the late 60s or something like that.
Well, not world champion, come on.
Anyway, so again, another cool game for the MC10 from Mr. Gary. So that guy is tireless, but he's working for you. So be sure to tip your Garys.
Good job, Jim.
Very good, Jim. All right. Well, I think that's the end of our news segment. So we're going to take another break, and we'll be back with some feedback.
Introducing the amazing cartridge vacuum by Romco, the new color computer accessory that protects all of your cartridges. Simply insert your cartridge into the cartridge vacuum. Turn it on and it starts automatically sweeping and vacuuming your cartridge instantly, loosening deep, damaging micro dust particles. Game cartridges, disc controllers, modem packs, any size fits. It makes a great Christmas gift and it's only $13.24.
Available at Walgreens, Shoppers Drug Mart, Woolco Woolworth, Family Drug Centers, Osco Drug, Canadian Tire, McDonald's, Piggly Wiggly, Montgomery Ward, Sears Roebuck, Village Pantry, Burger King, Sandy's, Duane Reade, Kate Spade, The Church of Scientology, Five Guys, Baby Gap, Swizzles, 7-Eleven, Albertsons, participating Exxon stations, Beauregard's, Almost Fried Chicken, ABC Liquors, Moon Pie General Stores, Whole Foods, Taco John's, Sherwin-Williams, and Goldblatt's.
All right. Well, now we're back with some feedback. Feedback's a little light this month, but we do have one from a Robert Alpizar, who is someone who sounds like he's pretty new to the CoCo community. He has some pretty complimentary things to say about the podcast, which we appreciate. So then he had a question. It's a little bit of a newbie question, but that's all right. So he said, what would you recommend in late 2017 for someone 100% new to the CoCo as, quote, starter gear? Should someone like me go nuts and go straight for a CoCo 3, or is the later 2 good enough? Are the first models still usable? There are a lot of modern peripherals available now. Should someone look for a flash memory-based storage device, or go for an old disk drive or tape drive for that original feel? My own personal interests are learning retro programming and possibly electronics tinkering, perhaps coming up with new peripherals if I learn enough. So Robert Alpizar. Well, so you certainly have a full plate there, Robert. I'm sure we could pass this around a little bit. But I would say there's nothing wrong with going for a CoCo 3. But I wouldn't say that it's absolutely necessary, depending on what you want to do. If you want to mess around with OS 9, definitely I'd say you go to CoCo 3 and expand in memory as much as possible, and just to give yourself some room to do some cool stuff. But I do a lot of stuff on a CoCo 2 and or CoCo 1, which is basically the same as a CoCo 2. There's lots of the old CoCo software will run on the 1s and 2s. So, I mean, I'd say you can't really go wrong. It just sort of depends on which direction you want to go. In fact, I think most of the programming stuff will run on the 1s and 2s. There's probably some exceptions on some of the language stuff. So I wouldn't be afraid of a 1 or 2 if it's in good shape. But I probably would look for a good deal on a CoCo 3. I mean, why not have both? As far as, do you want flash memory storage, or do you want to stick with a disk or tape drive for that original feel? Well, I'm sure most of us in this group, we like our floppies, but I'm going to say go ahead and get the CoCo SDC, save yourself a little headache. Maybe pick up a floppy in the longer run when you've learned a little more about the system. Tape drive is not a terrible thing to have, although for the most part, if you can get your tape software converted to a WAV file, the most important thing is a tape cable that you can then plug into the speaker on your on your cell phone, unless you're an iPhone user. And so you can load over the tape port without having an actual cassette player. But besides that, pick up an assembler. Either pick up the EdTasm cartridge or find an assembler that runs on a modern PC. Get either CoCo SCC or DriveWire. They give you a way to transfer code from the PC to the CoCo and start doing some programming and just have fun. But anyway, I kind of dominated that. But who else has an answer there? What do you guys think?
I think you pretty much nailed it there. It depends if you're not going to do OS 9, and the high ticket CoCo 3 games. I mean, the CoCo 1 and 2 would be great. There's quite a bit you can do on them. I've been digging the CoCo 2 a lot right now, and it'd probably be easier one to learn how to program on first, right?
Yeah, I was going to say that's kind of the good thing about this hobby is it's kind of modular. You can start out and pick up a CoCo 2, get DriveWire set up on it, get your feet wet with it, and then you can just add from there. It doesn't take a lot to get up and running and be able to do a lot.
I think the plethora of CoCo 2s on eBay make it a very compelling platform. They're usually a lot cheaper than the CoCo 3. So economically priced, it's easier to get started with one. You don't have as many video options, but at the same time, most people have a television. You can put a VGA adapter in it now for a decent, small amount of money, I guess. And, even this CoCo MIM Junior could turn it into a full-fledged level 2 system. So it's a lot of fun you can have with just a CoCo 2.
Yeah, and, the Dragon guys, they basically are CoCo 1s or CoCo 2s, whichever way you look at it. And they're pretty satisfied not having a CoCo 3 alternative. So there's plenty of cool stuff to be done with any of the models, I would say. But, so hopefully that provides something useful for Robert and anyone else with a similar question. So why don't we take... While we wrap up the feedback and take another little break, and then we'll be back with a discussion among the hosts.
Winter is here again. And whether you have a hunting cabin or just enjoy a rustic home, nothing is as comfortable as coming in from the cold to the warmth of a wood-burning stove. And now your TRS-80 color computer can monitor your stove with the Wood Heat Stove Monitor System. It's easy to install and works with any CoCo with 16K extended color basic. You can monitor the flue temp and set upper and lower temperature alarms. No more guessing when to add wood or oversleeping and waking up to a cold house. It's easy to use and easy to load from cassette. It even generates temperature graphs. The Wood Heat Stove Monitor System is just $74.95. Dealer inquiries are invited. Wood Heat is located at 1032 3rd Avenue in West Belmar, New Jersey.
All right, welcome back to the CoCo Crew Podcast. Unfortunately, there's been some sort of gumbo emergency down in southern Louisiana, and we've lost Boise. He's some sort of gumbo commissioner down there or something, I'm not sure. But anyway, with the rest of us, we'll carry on. We want to have another host discussion topic. We kind of struggled around, didn't have any great ideas, so this may not be a great idea, but we're going to try it anyway. So we're observing that there's been luckily for the community, there's been a fair number of software titles released recently. They've all been a bit different. And so stretching back, say, a month to Tandy Assembly, I had a bomb thread available on a cartridge, which is similar to some of the other cartridges we've had released. So that's an injection molded plastic cartridge case, and die cut box and a color 3x5 index card inserted with instructions. But since then, then we've had a kind of a second source issue of Bomb Threat from Rick Adams, where he's made it available as a disc image on I guess CD-ROM. And then we've had Forest of Doom that's been released, which came out as it's basically just a download of a disc image, but you have to buy a book to get it, which is kind of the most unique, I think. And then sort of in between, we've had Paul Thayer offering his an SD card with a disc image on it for fitting the CoCo STC. His includes a color printed manual, several pages, I think. So I don't know, some of these other options, before that, of course, we'd had Popstar Pilot had been offered on CD-ROM or DVD. I'm not sure which it is. But anyway, it had the advantage there that along with Popstar Pilot, you got all the next older games. So there's a value add there. The traditional style cartridges that I've been offering, I feel like there's a value add in that sense. We have kind of something to hold in your hands. Obviously, if you go with Forest of Doom, there's a value add, and you get a book. With the Paul Thayer's offering, so it's probably it's for CoCo STC users, but if you're halfway serious about CoCo these days, that's pretty much everybody. And you get the value add of the printed manual there. Who am I leaving out? Anyway, so we've got a lot of different ways to release software for the color computer. Some of them are amenable to kind of value-added collateral releases or value-added stuff that goes along with them, or extras or whatever you want to call it. I guess the point is, what is important when we release software? Hopefully the software is important. But does it matter what format what is released in? Are there formats that we prefer, and why? And as far as the kinds of value adds that you might bring along, are there other kinds of value adds that we care more about? Do we care about color printing? Do we care about a multi-page manual? Do we care about a book? So I'm just going to throw it out there because I talk too much. But what do you guys think? What's important on these software releases? What do you really value?
Well, my preference for media is obviously cartridge. I mean, I think everybody knows that. But it is good to get new CoCo software, regardless in any format. I mean, definitely take it any way. I'm definitely a sucker for anything extra. Whether it's a book, a map, a box. It kind of reminds me of the past. It's nostalgia. I mean, games back in the day, used to come with all that stuff. Now they come with nothing. They're usually just digital downloads. And if you want, some kind of a hint book or something like that, you got to buy that extra. It doesn't come with the game. So I do like to see that. I think it's it's a nice added touch to the game.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think all the like you said, the software is the most important component of it. And yeah, obviously I have many reasons to be a fan of the cartridge, although I'm not opposed to the other formats. I actually like, what's to prevent somebody from releasing something on cassette again?
Yeah.
I like Plateau of the Past. It's a disc and a book in a plastic bag, and that's still like it was back in the 80s. So there's really no wrong answer, I guess, as far as distributing things. I guess it just depends on the motivations. Ultimately, it comes down to the person that's developing these other things. They have to enjoy doing that. They have to enjoy making a book, and they're doing it for their own pleasure as much, or even in spite of what the community may think about it.
Right. Well, I think that's a good point. So if you want to develop a new game, say you want to develop an adventure game, some people might now, there's sort of a bar that's been set or a standard or whatever there might be people that say, well, I don't want to write a book, so I guess I can't release a game. And I think if there is somebody who thinks that way, I think that's a little silly. You know, if you want to write a book, that's fine. And I'm sure a lot of people would like to read the book, whether it's a kind of an extended instruction manual, which is basically what Forest of Doom is, or if it was full-blown fiction, 300 or 400 pages, if you've got it in you and you want to squeeze it out, I'm sure there's people who would buy it and would love to have a game to go along with that too. But if it's not there, if all you got is a game, well, I'm sure there's people who'd like to have the game. Similarly, I don't know. I mean, so for example, for myself, with the die cut boxes, the box design started out as a complete replica of the Tandy boxes for the cartridges, which of course had a big open window cut in the side of the box. And in Tandy's case, they would take the printed manual and slide that down to where you could see through the window and see the manual cover as the graphics for the box. And so in my case, I didn't really want to do that. I didn't really want to make the printed manual with the artwork on the manual. So I asked for the box with the solid side, and so I customized the boxes with a label. But ultimately, it's because I didn't want to write the manual, and so I try to make my games simple enough that I don't really think you need a big manual. And then I put in a smaller instruction card, which, has kind of the minimal instructions that you need or enough, I think, to get people playing. But that's just the way I've decided to go with mine. I don't know. I mean, people seem happy with it. I don't get a lot of complaints. So I don't know. I guess that's what it comes down to, is there's a lot of different ways to do it. And so if you have something to release, find a way to release it, but don't be intimidated by what everyone else is doing.
Don't be afraid of duplicating anything either. As far as, I want to do a book too. Great, do a book. Or you don't want to do a book, don't worry about it. Don't.
For sure, that's a good point too. Don't be chased off of it because, well, I mean, I don't know. I guess you could have a patent on a process for the CoCo release. It'd be interesting to see someone try to enforce one. But yeah, I don't think if you want to go off and release with a book or if you want to release with a SD card or whatever, I don't think there's anything that's closing you off from that. So if that's what you want to do, if that's the itches you've got to scratch, then go scratch it. I like, like I said, I like cartridges. I wish more people would release on cartridges because that's what I like to play. But, in the meantime, what I release most likely will be on cartridge because that's what I like to play. And that's the real key to happiness in the CoCo community, is to produce something that you want to consume, if you can. Because, if you're relying on other people to consume it, you might be unhappy about the results. But yeah, so anyway, but really though, what do you personally value? What do you like? So say if I printed my manual inserts in black and white, would you care?
No.
Or if I went from my 3x5 cards to a 6 or 8 page manual, would that make you want the cartridge more?
I don't think so. If it went with the game or the program, I mean, if it called for that.
Yeah, if the program needed more of a manual, then sure, that might make sense. But you don't always know that before you buy the game, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think anybody bought a game because of the manual.
Yeah.
Well, posters though and maps, that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so like Feelies, like Infocom was famous for, those would be cool, but I'm not sure we're really getting those at this point. Bruce's book is probably the most similar to a Feely.
And his game kind of called for the book, right? Because, I mean, he's got the breakdown of all the, spoiler alert, but he's got a breakdown of all the characters and, their powers and strengths, weaknesses.
Yeah, he's got like a monster manual or something in the book.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's cool because it goes with the game. But main thing, you don't want to get discouraged from writing new software for the CoCo. I don't want to give that impression.
Yeah, so I guess that's sort of my thing is we want your software. And, so some people have stepped up with some cool release options, printed manuals and whatever else, even my own stuff with boxes and cartridges or whatever. John Strong with the cartridges and the boxes and the shrink wrap and the hang tags and everything else. That's all fine and great, and if you enjoy it, then do it. But don't be intimidated by it. Don't think you have to do it the same way. If you want to produce a program on a disk image and put it on your Google Drive and let people download it from there, I think that's just as good. I mean, it's certainly good enough. Let's definitely put it that way. Without saying just as good, it implies, there's no value in the other stuff. There certainly is value in producing the nicer materials or whatever. I'm just saying it's not table stakes. You don't have to do all that to have a good program. You can just write your program. And the most important thing in all software development is having users. And if nobody uses your software, it might as well not exist. Right? So get the users, get your software, whatever, get it out there. You can get the users without having a fancy manual. I guess that's my point.
Yeah, look at the library of Jim Geary.
Yeah, exactly.
He doesn't have any manuals or fancy packaging or anything, and he's just got volumes of stuff out there, and it's great.
And he certainly got fans on this show.
Yes.
Well, awesome. Well, so you don't have to be Infocom. You don't have to have Feelies to release a good product, to release a program that people want to play or want to use. What you need is a program that people want to play and want to use. So put your effort into your software if you're a software developer. And if you're not a software developer, but you happen to be teamed up with one, and you're a writer or somebody who produces printed content or whatever, then by all means, help them out. Get as much cool stuff in there as possible. Just try not to jack the price up too much so we all can afford it. Because that is a downside of some of this, the fancier packaging or whatever. It does cost more money.
That's true.
And so, well, I won't go into too much more detail there, but if I could sell you just a cartridge in a plastic bag, it costs a little bit less. And maybe someday I'll switch to that. We'll see. But I think people do like having a certain amount of a manual and whatever. There's sort of an expectation. So I don't want to contradict my own self. You don't have to write a manual. But it's worth considering. Most people can probably squeeze out a 3x5 card. Let's put it that way. I can do it. You can do it. But anyway, was this dragging on long enough? Probably so. All right. Well, why don't we call this discussion closed for now? Hopefully it's inspired someone to send us some feedback. And if nothing else, maybe they can, tear us down on a competing program or something for our terrible opinion. All right. Well, let's wrap that one up. So thanks, guys.
Tandy looked down at their computer line and said, "I need color." So Tandy made the CoCo. Tandy said, "I need a computer that's powerful enough to do color graphics, but easy on the wallet. capable of sophisticated software, but easy to use and ready to play games from cartridge, so Tandy made the CoCo. Tandy said, I need a computer that can be used as soon as you power it on, but also capable of running a multitasking, multi-user operating system. A computer that can use a common television for its screen or a monitor for professional use, so Tandy made the CoCo. A computer that can be used to play games, create art and music, or perform business accounting. A computer that can be expanded over time to accommodate mass storage, speech and sound capability, and drive or line of dot matrix printers. A computer that can engage its users and allow them to learn how the computer works and the advantage of simple design. A computer that will keep its users awake into the wee hours of the night, not because they have to, but because they want to. A computer that someone will use and keep using even after more than 35 years and will gladly, proudly declare, I still use it. So Tandy made the CoCo.
Okay, welcome, CoCo Cruisers. Today we've got a real treat. We are doing an interview with kind of a pioneer in the computer gaming world, someone whose name you might be familiar with, Brian Moriarty. He was a game designer at Infocom, the text adventure company, for a number of years, and went on to join Lucasfilm or LucasArts. I'm not sure what the company's name was at the time, but he was the man behind the video game Loom, which is a little beyond the Tandy color computer, but still, I'll let you know we're talking to a real professional here. So, Brian, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me.
So if we can just jump right in, I guess we start back in the early days. I did a little reading on you, and it sounds like around the 1979 you were working at a Radio Shack when they dropped this nifty new thing on in a box to the store there. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah, so that job at Radio Shack was in summer of '78, and I guess the TRS-81 came out, at 77, right? So they, at first it was only, my understanding is at first they only had it on display in their showcase stores. Either because they thought that was the only places where there could be anyone who could afford the damn thing, or because it was expensive. It was like $599. That was a lot of money in 1977. But then slowly they rolled it out to smaller and smaller stores, and by 1978, by coincidence, the very first day I started working there was the day that my hole-in-the-wall store got its first demo model. It was the only one they ever shipped us, and so I was there for the unboxing, and so that was the first time I got my hands on a micro. Was that TRS-80 Model 1, which was the standard. Let's see, I think it had 16K of RAM and the cassette, and the black and white TV monitor with the all capital text, 64 characters, I think. So that was my first micro.
Cool. And so you had, sounds like you had a fair amount of time there dealing with the Battery of the Month Club customers.
Yeah, so Battery of the Month Club. So I did a lecture some years ago at the Game Developers Conference in San Francisco. Back in 2002, I did a lecture called The Secret of Sound 46, where I talked a fair amount about my job at that Radio Shack store. And I mentioned the horror of the Battery of the Month Club. I'm so glad that's gone. I really hated that. But anyway, my store was unfortunate. So it was located in downtown Worcester, which is where I happen to be tonight, actually. I ended up becoming a professor here at Worcester Polytech. So that store I worked at is no longer there, but its location is barely a mile away, or where it was anyway. Anyway, so the store I was in was right on the main square and was a very active store at one point, but then they decided to build a shopping mall right in the middle of Worcester. And so they bulldozed several square blocks of the city into oblivion and put up this big, shiny new shopping mall. And this mall was just 2 blocks away from my store. And, of course, what is one of the stores they decided to put in the mall but a brand new Radio Shack? So, so that means that we had 2 Radio Shack stores, 500 feet apart. One of them was in this rundown old building next to a pornographic movie theater. And the other one was in this shiny, clean new mall with acres of free parking and lots of security. And it was a really nice store setup. So guess where all the business went?
Yeah,
so luckily, that meant that we had very few customers, and I had lots of time to play with the computer. So I spent many of my days, I would go for sometimes like half an hour at a time with nothing better to do but sit there and read the manuals and fool around and start to program it, which I first did using BASIC. But then I quickly found out that there was this other secret language called Z80 assembler that you could get that would run much, much faster. And I somehow got my hands on the manual for that. And pretty soon I was writing assembly language games because they ran much, 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 much faster than the games in BASIC. I really, in retrospect, I'm really sorry I didn't buy one, even though they were really expensive. If I had saved my money for a few months, I probably could have swung it. And I would have been in on the game industry, a few years earlier than I even was. I was in very early, but even 1 or 2 years in those days made a huge difference. So I kind of missed that boat. But I got back in. So the interesting story is in that other Radio Shack store was a guy named Lee Pappas. He was about my age, around 21, and he was a sales clerk in the really good store. And we became friends because one night they had a big sale in the mall store and they needed all the help they could get. So they recruited me to go over there, and I got to do some sales there. And I met Lee, and we became friends. So fast forward 3 years. By this point, I'm actually a professional. I'm working as a technical writer at Bose Corporation, the loudspeaker manufacturer, which is located nearby here in Framingham. And a guy comes in to work with an Atari home computer, the 800. It's there so he can use VisiCalc, but during lunchtime he breaks out this game called Star Raiders, which was a very spectacular video game for home computers. So the minute I saw that, I got the computer bug again, except this time I wasn't going to buy a Tandy. I wanted an Atari. So the only dealer for Atari computers in the Worcester area was this little store off Route 9 here, and I go to the little store, which was the top half was a framing shop, and the bottom half was a little computer store. It was kind of funky. And I walk through the door, and who was standing behind the counter but my old friend Lee from Radio Shack 3 years ago. He has started this store for Atari home computers. He's the local dealer. And more than that, he has started a newsletter about Atari magazines. And it's up to its 4th issue, and it's become kind of a magazine. It's very popular, and it's getting serious. So I bought my Atari there. It cost, I think I paid around $2,100 for everything, which was a fabulous amount in those days, but it was a color machine, and it had all the stuff. And so anyway, to make a long story short, I ended up, the magazine took off. It became the largest Atari magazine in the world, and he needed help. And so he hired me away from Bose, and I became the technical editor at the magazine, which had a really stupid name. It was called Analog Computing, which is a strange name. But Analog was an acronym. It stood for Atari Newsletter and Lots of Games. Bad acronym. Kind of weird. Anyway, you can find all the back issues online. So I became technical editor of that magazine and worked there for about a year. And I became very enamored of the text adventures that Scott Adams and Infocom were making, especially Infocom. I really, really wanted to work there. And through various machinations, by spring of 1983, I actually started working at Infocom, not as a game designer originally, but as a engineer writing the interpreters for their computers. So I need to explain this. Infocom was probably the first game company. No, that's not true because Scott Adams did it too. Anyway, Infocom used what's called a virtual machine. That is, they wrote their code to compile for an imaginary CPU. And then what you would do is you would write an implementation of that CPU for any particular computer. And once you did that, any game written on the Infocom system would work on that computer. So Infocom used a mainframe, a DEC System 20 mainframe that was worth $1 million to actually create its games. We used a proprietary language, a Lisp derivative called ZIL for Zork implementation language. And my original job there was maintaining and writing the interpreters, that is the machine language interpreters that ran on the different machines. So because they used a virtual machine, the day they published a game, it became immediately available on about 10 different platforms. So we were everywhere. Practically every computer there was had Infocom games. You could get them all the day they came out. So my first jobs there were working. So the Atari. So back up a bit. I was at the Atari magazine. Of course, the Atari home computer was based, like the Apple II, on the 6502 microprocessor, which was not Atari's original choice. I read somewhere that originally they wanted to use this slightly more expensive but much nicer chip called the 6809. But decided not to do it because they were afraid they would alienate people who were already used to programming the 6502 and might not want to learn a new assembly language syntax. So they switched to the 6502. Bad move. Very bad move. Because the 6809 was a much, much better chip. As I found out when someone walked into my office one day and said, "We need an interpreter for the Tandy color computer." So I went to a local Radio Shack store with their checkbook and bought a CoCo and brought it into the office and started to investigate how to write a machine language interpreter for the CoCo. And that's when I first got introduced to the wonderful chip it used. It was a 6809, the one that Atari should have used. So the CoCo was, so I don't want to offend anyone on your program, but the CoCo was, by the standards of the other popular computers, kind of primitive. But it had this killer chip in it. So for people who don't know, the 6809 is kind of a baby 68,000. So the 68,000 was a full 16-bit chip. All of its registers were 16-bit, and it could address a full 16-bit address space. The 6809 was kind of a half-baked version of it. It was an 8-bit chip, but some of its registers were 16-bit. And most importantly, you could fetch and store 16-bit values using only one instruction. So this difference made an enormous impact on the efficiency of the interpreter that I finally wrote for it. For example, most of the 6502 interpreters that I wrote, and I maintained all of them. I worked on the Apple interpreter, the Atari interpreter, and the Commodore 64 interpreter. I also created a new interpreter for the Commodore Plus 4, which also uses 6502. But when I got to the color, so those interpreters, by the time they were done, would tend to be about 8 kilobytes in size. That was typical size for an Infocom interpreter on those chips. The 6809, because it could fetch and store 16-bit values with a single command, was much smaller, only about 5K, and ran much faster, even though the chip was clocked at a slower speed because of its efficiency. So the chip had a lot of really nice features. I really loved learning it and working with it, and I was very angry at Atari when I later learned that they had actually considered using it. It would have given them a huge advantage because they already had this wonderful graphics hardware. If they had powered it with that chip, it would have blown the Apple and Commodore out of the water. But they didn't. So they missed the boat there. But Tandy picked up on it, and they were very helpful. I had a liaison at Tandy headquarters, technical liaison. And the biggest problem I had with the color computer was making it talk to our mainframe. Because in order to run the games, we had to download the virtual source code for the games onto the target platform. And there was no modem for the color computer and no way to directly hook up to another system. So I had to write what's called a software UART. That is a program that you can hook up to a telecommunication line, and it reads bits in real time off the line. It can read and write bits. So to do this on the color computer required cycle level timing accuracy. Because it had to be working at the same baud rate as the computer it was talking. It was basically a software modem that we needed to create in order to get the data out of the mainframe. And with the help of Tandy, they gave me some pointers and stuff. And I remember the triumphant day when I hooked up the thing and it began reading sectors of code off the TOPS 20 mainframe and writing them directly to sectors of a CoCo disk. So that was the day that the interpreter came to life, because I could finally get some real game data to test the games with. And it worked almost perfectly the first time I ran it. I was very pleased with myself.
Awesome.
So that was a great chip. And, the display was, it can only show uppercase characters, and it was only 32 characters wide. It was not a very good machine for playing Infocom games, but it could play them. And it did. And they sold fairly well on the CoCo. So that was a nice adventure. That was the last interpreter I wrote before they made me a game designer. They finally promoted me, and I began actually writing games instead of writing interpreters for games. But yeah, the CoCo was fun. I remember it fondly, despite its hardware crudity. That chip was really fine. Interestingly, I did not use any Tandy assemblers or anything to create the code. I was kind of advanced for the time. I was actually writing all the code on a Deck System Rainbow, which was a PC based on CP/M, which later got morphed into Windows. So this was a floppy-based CP/M machine, and I was using what's called cross compilers. That is, it's a program where you can write source code for a chip that runs on another machine, and the cross compiler would take your source code and create actual machine code that you could then load onto the other machine. So I actually did the programming for the color computer interpreter on a Deck System Rainbow system. And then I transferred that data onto the color computer using direct disk access to the hard drives. So it was rather involved, the technical aspects of this, but it was fun and rewarding.
Funny. There's always a bit of an ongoing debate among some of the people who like to write code for older machines. Are you cheating if you use a modern PC to do your assembly or whatever?
No, that's what we did back then. We used the best tools we could get. We didn't have time. The assembler they had for the color computer was a toy. It would have taken me forever to write anything with that thing. On the Deck Rainbow, I had an 80-column display with upper and lowercase characters and powerful operating system. It'd be crazy not to use that kind of power.
Sure, I agree.
And I think the same is true today. Unless you're being totally retro and want to use the original tools available at the consumer level, sure, go ahead. But the tools for the color computer were not, at least the consumer level tools were not very good. Not nearly as good as what you could get for the Apple or the Atari or the C64. They were, at least the ones that I had access to. They maybe internally they had better tools, but they didn't give me access. But I had this. I remember the company was called Avocet, the company that made these cross compilers. I used the same technology for the other chips, by the way, too. I did everything on the Rainbow, and then transferred the resulting code to the target machine to execute it. But it worked. Yeah, if I were programming for a color computer today, I would definitely use the best possible assembler I could find. Why would you waste time with anything less? Right?
Sure, definitely. So if I could, you mentioned you had a tech liaison at Tandy. I don't suppose you remember.
I do not remember who that was. We're talking a very long time ago now. We're looking back, 35 years?
Yeah, plus, right?
Yeah.
I just thought, just in case, it might be. It'd be.
Yeah, I don't remember. I may have it in my records. I have the source code actually to that interpreter. I did printouts of all my source code and kept them in a binder, and I have the binder, so I still have the source code.
I don't suppose there's any way to share that.
Well, it's only on paper. I don't have a digital version, so it would be a bit awkward to
have to get somebody to come scan it for you.
But yeah, I'm pretty sure I have all the source code to my interpreters.
Any listeners in the Worcester, Mass area, please contact Brian.
Right. So, but yeah, so that was what I did. That was the only Tandy machine I ever touched. Although Infocom did support the TRS-80, but it would only work on systems with disk drives, and most people who had Model 1s or even Model 3s tended not to have the drives. They were expensive, very expensive. They tended to be cassette people, so those, they had to play the Scott Adams games. So,
right.
But if you had a disk, so the color computer had cheaper disk drives, and so we figured it would be worth supporting them. So that's why we did it.
So was there a team of people working on the interpreters?
No, but just me.
Cover the whole range?
Alone. I did the whole thing myself.
Wow.
That's amazing.
Well, it wasn't that big a deal. It was just I already had written several or modified several machine language interpreters for other machines. I knew how to do it. It's just I had to make a 6809 version. So I got they had this standard reference book you could get on the 6809, and I studied it. And as I studied, I said, "Hey, this chip is kind of neat. You can load and store 16-bit values in one command. That makes things really easy because a lot of the values that the interpreter used were 16-bit, but on a 6502, you have to grab the first byte, process it, and then store it, and then grab the second byte and process it and store it. So everything took twice as long. That was that one difference made all the difference for that chip. It really was a baby 6809, a baby 68,000. The 68,000 instruction set's almost identical. It's just that everything is 16-bit. It's weird because I think the index registers on the 6809 were only 8-bit, which is strange. I may be wrong about that. I mean, I haven't touched or thought about the chip in decades, but are they 16? Yeah. So if they are, gee, it's funny. So I guess it's really a 68,000 with an 8-bit bus. Or something like that, right? But it was a good chip. I have fond memories of working with it. Yep, and boy, was that interpreter fast.
And so was there basically just one release of the interpreter? Releases, do you recall?
Yeah, I mean, once it got working, so the minute you got an interpreter working, we had a test suite, a special little game we ran that tested all the functions of the interpreter. And if an interpreter could pass that test suite, it was pretty likely to be able to run all the games without any problems. So as soon as the test suite was running, I downloaded all of the virtual games onto Tandy disks, CoCo disks, and our testing department started testing all the games on it, and there were no errors found. It ran them perfectly. So that was the advantage of our virtual technology, is that one person working for a month or less could get all the games running on that system. So as soon as the interpreter was certified, we started manufacturing, and those games became available in the Radio Shack stores all around the world. So some of the later games would not run on the CoCo because they started getting big, but most of the classics would run on it. The uppercase display was kind of ugly, though. So it was not the best. It was not a really good machine for playing those games. It didn't present the text very attractively, but it ran. So
that's actually been a little topic recently. Some of the community is that somebody back in the day did have a patch for the interpreter that when it ran on the CoCo 3, which could do 80 columns in lowercase. that they had patched the interpreter to come up and at least use the 80 column part. I'm not sure about the lowercase.
I'm not sure. I don't remember if 80 column was wired into it or not. I'm not sure how I did it. I never got to look at the CoCo 3. I don't know if did we ever actually sell a CoCo 3 version of the games? I'm not sure if we did or not.
I can't find it if it did.
I don't think we did. I think we only did the CoCo 1.
Right. But yeah, so apparently somebody did have a third-party patch that would make it work on the CoCo 3 at 80 columns, and then there's talk of recreating the patch.
Well, I mean, if you have the spec for so first of all, I imagine there are probably virtual emulators for both CoCo 1 and CoCo 3, right?
Sure, definitely.
Yes.
Yeah. So if that's the case, the specification of the Z machine, that is the virtual machine that we wrote for, has been published. It's been out there for years. It would be not very difficult to write new interpreters for both machines. You could write a new, custom interpreter for the CoCo 3, the virtual CoCo 3, because the spec is out there. It wouldn't be that hard. You would need to have what chip did that use? Was that 6809 as well?
Yes.
Yes.
If it was, then
mostly a different video chip.
Yeah. So if it's a 6809 chip, then if there's a 6809 assembler out there, and I imagine there probably is, you should be able to write an interpreter for that if you really wanted one. And then if you could get the object code for the games, that is the Z code, which you can get by ripping the discs, the original disc. Actually, the Z code for all the games is widely available. It's a block of code anywhere between 80 and 128K, which contains the actual game code in Z code format, the virtual format. If you can get your hands on that for any game and write an interpreter, the game will run. That's the miracle of virtual machines, right? So a CoCo 3 interpreter could certainly be built if the assembler is out there, there must be a assembler for that chip somewhere,
Definitely, yes. We have all the tools.
You could even I'll bet there are actually C compilers you could probably find that would compile to that chip.
There are.
Yep, not surprised. But in those days, everything was written in assembly, not just for speed, but for size. There was not much RAM available on those machines, and the interpreter had to be resident all the time, which is why it was so great that the CoCo interpreter was so small, because it gave more room in memory for the game. You could never load the entire game, though. The game was all the games on the micros had to be paged in from the disk. You needed to keep the drive attached all the time, and code would be paged in as it was needed because there was not enough memory to hold both the interpreter and the entire game. So,
yep. Well, so
I miss those days.
So at some, yeah. So they recognized your talent for being able to produce games. Probably.
Well, I had published a couple of adventure games in Analog, the Atari magazine. That was their big thing, is that every month they would publish a full scale game in the magazine, and these weren't dopey little demo games. These were dead on accurate recreations of major arcade games. They had a couple of engineers there who were just really, really good as Atari's own programmers. And every month they would somehow crank out a really great game. And in those days, the way that you played the game was the source code to the game was printed in the magazine, and you typed it in by hand, one line at a time.
Yeah, we know those days well.
and people did it. You could get a disc-based subscription to the magazine, but they were very expensive because discs were expensive. But most people would just type in the source code right into their machines, and we at Analog we used a special system, a checksum-based system that would detect errors in your typing, which otherwise would drive you crazy if you couldn't find an error. But we had a system that would let you check your typing to be sure it was correct. So my first 2 adventure games were actually written for the Atari and were published in the pages of Analog. So when I went to Infocom, although I went as an engineer, I had my eye on being a designer, and I had 2 published games under my belt. So when an opening appeared, I was interviewed and got the job. So
that's cool. And so that was for Wishbringer?
Yes, Wishbringer was the first one I did. That came out in 85, and it sold really, really well, partly because the game that came out just before it was The Hitchhiker's Guide, which sold like crazy and made all the dealers really, really like Infocom, so that when the next game came out, they were happy to promote it, and it sold really, really well as a result. So that was nice.
Awesome.
I don't know if that Wishbringer, yeah. And then the next year I did Trinity, and then in '87 Beyond Zork was the last one I finished for them. I worked on a couple other projects between Trinity and Beyond Zork. I worked a little bit on Douglas Adams' game Bureaucracy. I did maybe a month or 2 of work on that. And then after Beyond Zork, I worked on a game that never got published because I got invited to a job at Lucasfilm Games. If someone asks you if you'd like to work at Skywalker Ranch, don't say no.
Probably no chance of that anyway.
Yeah, it was quite an invitation. So when I went there in 1988. It was called Lucasfilm Games. It didn't get the LucasArts name until the early 90s.
Okay.
So originally it was Lucasfilm Games when I went there. And that's the company name that Loom was published under. It was a Lucasfilm Games title.
Cool. And you got the gourmet shelf lunches and drinking.
The whole
coffee
9 yards. Yep, it was. I could start dropping names of the people who I either saw or actually met there. I mean, it was like Grand Central Station for movie stars and rock stars, because it was very secluded and very private and very secure. And so whenever large rock bands would come into the San Francisco or Oakland area to play a concert, rather than the risk of putting them up in a hotel where they could get mobbed and inconvenience the hotel staff, they would. There was a beautiful guest house at Skywalker Ranch. They would very often stay at the ranch, and so we would see them hanging out. So I could start dropping names of some of the very famous rock stars who would just wander into the cafeteria suddenly. I remember standing in line one day at the lunch line, and in front of me was Huey Lewis, and behind me was Bonnie Raitt.
That's awesome.
So here's my best story. I have 2 really good ones. One is one day I'm walking down one of the roads towards the sound stages, and there's this family on bicycles driving up towards me, and a couple of kids and a woman, and this guy who is not wearing a shirt. And from the shirt down, he looks like an 18-year-old athlete. But from the neck up, he looks like an old horse. So this was Roger Daltrey. And he was apparently The Who was playing at the Oakland Coliseum, and they were staying at the ranch. So later that day, on my way back, I happened to walk through the cafeteria, and I saw one of the strangest things I've ever seen. They're sitting at a table. The room is empty, but sitting at one of the tables are 3 people. On one side is Roger Daltrey. On the other side is Pete Townsend. And sitting between them in a conversation is Leonard Nimoy. Now, just think about that for a minute. What does The Who have to say to Mr. Spock?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I can't imagine what they were talking about, but I would have loved to listen in on that conversation. But there was a rule at the ranch that you did not bother the celebrities. It was supposed to be a place where everyone, you were told on your very first day, you will see many famous people. Do not drool, do not let your jaw drop open. Do not ask for autographs. Be cool. Keep away. Be quiet. And maybe they'll talk to you. And often they did. The other cool one was we had an email system at the ranch. It was, not the internet, but it was a local email system. And they had several sound stages there. And among them was one stage, the scoring stage, which was the best recording studio in the San Francisco Bay Area. So a lot of bands would use it for rehearsals and making records. One afternoon, about 4 o'clock, we got an email sent to the entire ranch that said, if you're interested, come to the soundstage at 5 o'clock. So those of us in the know who had been rehearsing his live show for the past 2 weeks on the soundstage. So at 5 o'clock, about 80 of us showed up and stood 10 feet away from Mick Jagger as he performed his entire live act. That was thrilling, to say the least. He is an amazing performer. Of course, this would have been back around 1990 or so. He was much younger then, but still an amazing shape and an amazing. But there are many. I could give you drop names and give you stories like that all day. It was an amazing place to work, and of course, there was a fairly well-known celebrity who ran the place and was there all the time, right? So, but there were lots of movie stars, lots of rock stars. George was dating Linda Ronstadt at the time, so she was there all the time. And Steven Spielberg would drop by all the time, and we met Francis Coppola there at a Christmas party, and just everybody. Robin Williams, who lived in Marin County, was there a lot, and the Grateful Dead hung out there frequently. You'd see Jerry Garcia riding a bike around, or Mickey Hart in the control room somewhere. They hung out. So strange time.
Oh wow! So, well, I would ask you to contrast the West Coast and the East Coast, but it sounds like you were kind of in your own personal little bubble there.
No, they're very different. I can characterize the difference pretty succinctly. In New England, if you're dating a girl for the first time and you knock on the door, they'll say, "Oh, Moriarty." That's Irish. In California, if you knock on the door, they'll say, "Oh, Moriarty," and look over your shoulder. That's a Lamborghini. That's kind of the difference in a nutshell. So the thing is, in California, there's nothing old. So New England, I live here in Boston. This is one of the oldest parts of America. It's only about so it only goes back to 1610. Right, that's the Pilgrims. Right. If you go to Europe, there's stuff that's thousands of years old, right? Roman ruins and stuff. Here, nothing is much older than if a house is more than 250 years old, it's a tourist attraction, right? But in California, things are much younger than that. The area didn't begin to get. In 1850, if you were on the San Francisco Peninsula, you were in danger of being eaten by a grizzly bear. San Francisco didn't really get going until the gold rush, right? So it has much less history behind it. Not that New England has that much, but we have about 3 times as much as them. And California, everybody's from somewhere else. Very few people are actually natives. Almost everybody comes from somewhere else, including many other countries. So there are a lot of Asians, and Pacific Rim people are very well represented there, as well as all their culture. So it's a real cultural melting pot. And of course, San Francisco is famous as a gay haven. So there's a great deal of tolerance there, far beyond what you see in most North American cities. The only city to compare to it really is Montreal, maybe. So it's a crazy, wild city. It's kind of a city of outlaws. Sure. Beautiful place. That's the difference between the West Coast. They're very, as particularly, and we have to make a distinction in California. There's 2 Californias. There's Northern California, which is, high tech, Silicon Valley, San Francisco, tasteful, and then there's L.A. which is 400 miles south, and a completely different mindset, a different place, a place you don't want to go ever. Flying into LAX at night is like flying over the Death Star. It goes on forever as far as you can see. It's just, I despise LA, and I have to spend a week there in about a month. I'm really not looking forward to going there. I really hate that place. Two very different Californias.
Oh goodness. Well, guys, Mike, Neil, anything you guys want to jump in and ask?
I just had one question. Do you do any dabbling in assembly in today's world?
No. Assembly is used now only for people who are either writing new C compilers for new chips, which is rare. It's used for driver development. There's certain tasks that require assembly language when you need to actually address specific locations in a machine. So drivers need to do that. So people who do graphics drivers and hardware drivers are the people who use assembly now. You rarely see it used for anything else. Occasionally, somebody will take part of their C program and optimize it in assembly if it needs to be super fast. But the assemblers are so good now, and the processors are so fast that writing in assembly takes 10 times longer than writing in any high-level language. It's a very detail-oriented. It's very difficult. We offer classes in it here at WPI, but we use a virtual machine to teach it. We don't actually teach them any actual chip architectures. It's just not that very common a skill anymore. But of course, back in the early 80s, if you wanted to write anything serious on a micro, you had to use it. Right. The high-level languages were just impossible. They were impossibly slow. You had to use assembly.
Now, are you writing games?
For writing anything.
Games?
Am I starting?
You personally, are you? Yeah.
Well, I have several. I do a lot of consulting with game companies. My main job is teaching game design now, but I do have a hand in games every now and then. I had that lecture I mentioned, The Secret of Psalm 46, made it an unabridged video of that, made it as an Easter egg into The Witness. The whole video is in there. It's actually, you have to watch the whole thing in order to solve one of the problems. It's 57 minutes, and you have to sit through the entire thing to solve one of the puzzles.
Yeah. That's pretty cool. That's actually a really cool lecture, too, by the way. That I listened to, I read the transcript and listened to part of the audio. I've got the audio that was produced for the version that's in The Witness. I produced a special high definition version of the video, and the soundtrack on there is actually on my. If you listen to part of the audio, that's actually the soundtrack to the version that's in The Witness. But in The Witness, it has the video as well. So what's interesting is we're running out of time here, but an interesting thing is, so next week, as you probably have heard, we're having a total eclipse in America, and I'm going to see it, I hope. I'm hoping to see it out of the Midwest. Ask you about that.
Yeah, I'm hoping to see it. So the video for The Secret of Psalm 46, while I'm speaking, the video you see is a real-time simulation of a total solar eclipse, beginning with the first contact of the moon and ending with the beginning of totality, which takes just about as long as an hour-long GDC lecture to happen. So I did it. So I did it as a simulation, but at the eclipse next Monday, I am hoping to capture the real thing.
Awesome.
And by my side will be Jonathan Blow.
Cool.
So kind of those weird coincidences, but yeah. So anyway, that's
awesome.
But yeah, I'm hoping to see it, weather permitting. It'll be an adventure. I've always wanted to see one. So
I'm glad you'll get to fulfill that.
I hope so. It depends on the weather.
Well, so what are we not asked that maybe that comes to mind or that you
any other
might want to
questions?
talk about? Any random thoughts on game design? What makes a good game?
No, it was just to say that working on the micros in assembly was very nice because you had to get to know the hardware. You're actually touching the hardware. There was no operating system. When you write for game engines today, you're writing for a very high level engine. You're not accessing pixels at all. You're dealing with 3D objects and textures. Everything is written at a very, very high level. The actual hardware is invisible to you. But back in the day, you were touching the hardware. You're actually putting bytes into the video memory itself by hand, right? You were so in order to master a machine, you had to really get to know its hardware capabilities very intimately, and once you had that knowledge, if you were a good programmer, you could make that machine do just about anything it could possibly do. And that was nice. I very much miss that very direct contact with the hardware. That immediacy and that intimacy that you're actually putting values into the hardware registers to make things happen. That's been gone for so long now. I think that CoCo interpreter was the last time I ever programmed at that level.
Right.
And I miss it. That was because it's a special kind of programming. And it would take a long time to get the skill to know a particular micro well. You really had to work with it for like a year to really get to know it. But once you knew a machine well and you knew the assembly, you could make that machine do anything its processors and hardware would allow you to do. There was no limit except for the amount of RAM, right, and the number of pixels available. And the speed of the chip, right? So,
sure. The actual limits of the hardware.
Yeah, you were dealing with real limits where it's much more. Everything is indirect now, very high level, very abstract, and that's fine. I mean, good games can still be made, of course, they are every day, but it's not the same. It's a different kind of programming, and something was lost there, I think.
Yeah, I definitely see what you're saying. Well, guys, is that it?
I think so. We're about used our hour up.
Okay.
Well, thanks. It was fun to talk about CoCo. No one's asked me about it in so long, or having a chance. But when I got your request, it suddenly all came back. Oh, CoCo, that was that really great chip. No.
Yeah, awesome. Well, definitely glad to have you on, especially with your enthusiasm. And did we? Have you ever spoken to Kevin Savitz?
I don't recall the name, but my memory is becoming unreliable.
Kevin interviews a lot of old computer people of various stripes, particularly Atari, and so we occasionally we've managed to scoop him on an interview. So I like to note that.
I do so many of these nostalgia interviews. There are so many groups interested in this stuff. It's kind of cool, actually, that there are so many. Yeah. And people are still making games for those old machines, or at least emulations of them.
Sure.
I can see why. I mean, the reason they do it is because they have that direct access. Although doing it on an emulator is kind of cheating, but.
Well, sure.
I would love to get my hands on an actual Atari and program it again using the tools we use. That would be a blast to do that. But I don't know if I suppose I could probably scrape something together on eBay. I don't know if it would still work, but.
Oh yeah, I'm sure we could hook you up with some people that could get you lined up right there.
Sure. Yeah, anyway, I imagine there are people who keep them working.
Oh yeah, definitely,
absolutely.
But, thanks again for joining the interview. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure. Nice meeting you all.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Fred.
Yeah.
Remember when I wanted to run the business on our color computer?
Yeah.
And you said it was too hard to move back and forth through all those different programs.
Yeah.
And you said all the software would cost $1,000.
Yeah.
Well, you want to hear something?
No.
VIP Library integrates all the applications we need, and guess who sells it?
Tiny Tim.
No, SD Enterprises.
Swell.
All 6 VIP applications are combined onto one disk. VIP Database, VIP Writer, VIP Spell, VIP Calc, Terminal, and Disk Zap. So we can do mail merge, finances, correspondence, all with VIP Library.
Yeah?
Yeah, and it's not $1,000. It's just $169.95.
Wonderful.
Finally, we'll have time to go see a movie.
No. VIP Library, the only integrated application suite your CoCo will ever need.
All right. Welcome back, CoCo Cruisers. This time for a tech segment. This, of course, is John Linville, your host. We're going to talk about something a little different this time. This is a project that you could do for your CoCo or with your CoCo, and it has technical components, but it's not exactly the normal kind of, use this kind of transistor or write this kind of code. I guess there's a bit of a code writing aspect to it, but it doesn't have to be. It kind of depends on how you take it. It's kind of confusing for a start, but hopefully we're going to get you understanding here pretty quickly. So the gist of this project is we're going to exploit one of the features of the old text adventure games from a company called Infocom, and also learn how to take advantage of the fact that the interactive fiction fans of the world produce new games that are actually compatible with the old system used by Infocom. And so therefore, if there's an Infocom game out there that for whatever reason that wasn't released on the CoCo, or if there's a fan game out there that you'd like to play on the CoCo, this project's going to talk about how you go about it. So, all right. Well, how's that for a little bit of an intro? So the thing is back in the day when there were a lot of different viable computing platforms, it just wasn't really economical to try to write new code for every project or every platform. And so you kind of either had to pick a platform, or you had to find a way to maximize your game design effort with minimal technical effort. And so a number of producers went that way. And so a well-known example is Sierra Online, and they had their AGI system, Advanced Game Interpreter. I'm not sure what it's. Adventure Game Interpreter. Yeah. So anyway, the notion there was you could have an AGI engine implementation for each computer, and then you could produce AGI games, and the source material for the game or whatever would pretty much just work on every machine that had an engine implementation. And we've seen that exercised by Guillaume Major has done this a number of times, where he's I think the ones on the archive, the Sierra games on the archive may in fact be mixed and matched a bit between some of the different AGI interpreters, King's Quest or Leisure Suit Larry or whatever. But more importantly, he's also taken fan-made AGI games and had them run on the color computer. And so, it's a cool thing to see happen in a way. It's a good way to be able to consume some content that wasn't otherwise available for the CoCo. And it's cool to do a project that automatically has some content available. But Sierra wasn't the only company that did this. Before that, or at least contemporary with Sierra, there was a company called Infocom. And Infocom was famous for a number of text-based adventures, including the Zork series. And these were all text adventures or interactive fiction. where the graphics chip was in your head. Anyway, Infocom did their implementations around something they called the Z machine. So they would write an implementation of the Z machine interpreter for each target system, and then they could produce Z machine game files that would just run on most or all of those other systems. And occasionally you'll find some that, you will find some that rely on later or different versions of the Z machine that don't necessarily work with the earlier versions, but for the most part, as long as you match the versions, the games will work across a wide variety of machines, especially contemporary machines like the CoCo, the Apple, whatever. This system existed, and there were Infocom games released for the CoCo. So the remaining piece is that eventually somebody, actually quite some time ago, 20 years ago, in the mid-90s, someone figured out enough about how the Infocom system worked that they produced a new compiler for writing Z machine games, and that one's called Inform. And, so you can produce new Z machine games, and so people have done things like they ported the old adventure game, which was kind of at least a spiritual predecessor to Zork, and they've written other games in Inform, and there's probably hundreds of them now available if you check out the Interactive Fiction archive or whatever. You can find a bunch of them. And so Inform is still available as open source. It's gone through a few revisions, but if you get a revision that can still produce old enough Z machine output, or for old enough version of Z machine output, you can build these Inform files and run them on the interpreter that runs on the CoCo. And so it's a source of new game material that can run on the CoCo. I've got a series of blogs that I've written recently, and I'll have links to those in the show notes. And so if the verbal description here gets a little light on details, you may want to check out the text description. Hopefully that'll be helpful. So moving on, let's see. So Inform, we were talking about, it was originally released in 93. And the versions progressed until there was a major rewrite by the original author around 96, which brought Inform version 6, or major version 6. And this language era of Inform 6 is largely a procedural language. It has some object-oriented features. About 10 years later, in 2006, came a major version update of Inform called Inform 7. But the language changed quite a bit. And so the Inform 7 has what's called a declarative kind of syntax, which kind of looks almost more like in some ways it's more like one of those old math problems where it says let x equal 2 times y for values of y from 10 to 15 and that sort of thing. So it's sort of becomes more of a non-traditional style of programming language, whereas I hear that with Inform 6 you actually can write pretty generic programs, including even though it's designed for text adventures, you can even write like a Tetris clone or something like that in Inform 6. Whereas Inform 7 also, along with being a kind of a different kind of programming paradigm, it also is pretty domain specific, so not much good for anything but writing text adventures. Does that matter? Well, probably not, but anyway, now while Inform 7 actually does use a version of Inform 6 kind of under the covers for compiling down to the Z machine code, apparently the version that's in Inform, the version of Inform 6 included with Inform 7 is a bit too recent, and so somewhere before that forked off, the Inform 6 compilers stopped being able to produce Z machine code that fits the older versions of the interpreters. Someone I know from Kansas Fest, Michael Sternberg, very nice guy. Does some cool technical projects. Anyway, recently he did a project similar to what we're talking about here, but for the Apple. And so he has a nice write-up on what he learned in doing that. So he suggests sticking with Inform version 6.1.5 for producing Z machine code that runs on the interpreters for, well, the version 3 interpreters like they found on the Apple II and the CoCo and that sort of thing. But so anyway, as I was saying before, if you get Inform running on your local Linux machine or possibly Windows machine or whatever, then you'll be in a position to compile Inform source code for other games. And if you go out to the Interactive Fiction Archive, like I said, you can find a number of games that have been put out by their authors. And it continues to happen even in the modern times. And so you can compile those, or you can write your own. If you're writing in Inform 6, the manuals, the kind of the preeminent manual for Inform 6 can be obtained from Amazon in hard copy as the Inform Designer's Manual 4th edition. And so I recommend, if you're interested in writing interactive fiction and using the system from Infocom, then I recommend that you look into that. It's a cool way to be able to work on producing your content and not having to write a bunch of code. There are, of course, some other issues involved. Maybe we'll touch on that later on. So anyway, once you've got your what's called a story file, your Z machine code that's been compiled by Inform or something else, you can get some pre-compiled story files also from the Interactive Fiction Archive or elsewhere, or in some cases you can just download them from some other place. But for games that were already produced by Infocom but for some reason weren't released on the CoCo, but one way or another, you grab that. You take your story file, but to run it on the CoCo, you still have to get the Z interpreter, also known as a zip, and not zip like the compressor, like PKZip, but it's just a Z interpreter, ZIP. Anyway, you can take the zip from an existing released Infocom game and match it with a new story file. And like I said, as long as the story file matches a V3 of the Z machine, then you should be in business. You should be able to run the game on the CoCo. So I after reading Michael Sternberg's paper back in the summer, I kind of messed around with this quickly, and just at first it looked like, after only checking a couple of the files, but it looked like all of the machines were using the exact same Z interpreter. All of the games, rather, were using the exact same Z interpreter on the CoCo. And so I just took a look at Zork 1 and kind of figured out how the system was put together, and was able to go and kind of use a disk image of Zork 1 and the DD command on Linux. DD is kind of like a fancy version of copy, but rather than copying an entire file, it has a variety of options for doing all kinds of crazy things. But the way I'm using it here, there are options that basically let you go into a file and copy part of the file and out either to a separate file or into another file at a given location, just however many bytes you want or whatever. So it's not like just copying over it, but you just kind of take a little piece of one file and put it into a little piece of another file. It's a pretty flexible tool. If you're at all using Linux for anything, you should probably figure out how to use DD, because you can do some cool stuff with it. But anyway, with a little quick checking the disk image and hex dump of the disk image, and using some of the knowledge I have of the CoCo, and I was able to kind of figure out what was where, and use the DD command. I could copy out the Z image interpreter and the boot code, and figure out where to copy the story file onto a new disk image. I was able to boot up and play a different game on the CoCo. So I was pretty cool with that. And that actually is what inspired me to kind of look more into the Infocom stuff, and ended up reaching out to Mr. Moriarty, who agreed to have the interview with us. And so I've kind of been saving back on having this tech segment until we ran the interview. But in the meantime, I've done a little more research, and I figured out, well, the most interesting thing I figured out was that if you actually check all of the games, there actually are different versions of the interpreter in use. And so by running through all the games, which I've got a chart in my blog, one of my blog entries, and using the $version command which is I guess a special command you give to the interpreter that it's not part of the game, it's part of the interpreter, so it's kind of a meta command or whatever. Anyway, if you check all the different games in the Color Computer Archive, you get 3 different versions reported back from the version command, depending on which game you're using. Some of them report version A, some of them report CoCo 2 version C, and then some of them report CoCo version D. So, I don't know, I think that's interesting in that none of them offer anything resembling a version B. And I don't see anything with a version E or later either. The other thing that I thought was interesting is if you assume that version A was the oldest version of the interpreter and version D was the newest, with version C somewhere in between, if you look at the actual release date of the various games, they don't really line up with the ordering of the interpreter versions. So it raises some questions of, did they just randomly mix and match these for some reason at Infocom, or did they, did they originally, were they all available with a version A of the interpreter, and then just periodically got refreshed, and so maybe, as the interpreter got refreshed, and so maybe the images that eventually ended up in the Color Computer Archive were from discs that were bought just in a different chronological order or whatever. What happened there? It's kind of, it probably doesn't matter much, but it's sort of an interesting little piece of history to want to understand. That said, I don't really, I don't know what the differences are between version A and version D or whatever. But when it came time to pick which interpreter to try to use generically, I kind of just decided, well, version D sounds newer. So hopefully version D is the best interpreter to use, or at least the one that's going to be most compatible with other games. Now, I could be completely wrong, but that's what I'm hoping. So anyway, so how does this work then? Well, so keep in mind, the other thing is, the games that came with the version A interpreter, were not compatible with the DOS command. And so you actually had to do a loadem of a game file and exec from that, or you had to have a basic program that did that for you. And there were actually examples of each. It looks like some of the games in the Color Computer Archive were actually either hacked or claimed to be hacked or whatever. So I don't know if they were actually pure images to begin with. Anyway, the version C interpreters, which say CoCo 2 version C. Version A doesn't say CoCo at all. Version C says CoCo 2 version C. And then version D just says CoCo version D. So, I don't know. I don't think that's significant either. As far as I know, the CoCo 2 version C still works on the CoCo 3. But, anyway, just kind of interesting that there was a little bit of variation there. So anyway, so the version C and version D are compatible with the DOS command, and some of them have valid directory entries. Some of them don't have directory entries at all. So the ones that have a valid directory entry and that show a bin file, you can, instead of doing a DOS command, you can go load M and exec the bin file. So there's quite a bit of variation in how these are built. So I don't know if they were all built originally by the same people. I don't know. I know some of them appear to have been hacked, and some of the directory entries have been hacked to put messages in them. It's kind of interesting. But, if you want to do something like that, if you want to use the Infocom interpreter, you can hack up the directory entries to put in messages when you do dir, that sort of stuff. It's up to you. But anyway, so let me just verbally kind of describe the structure of the disk. So the main thing that I think they all have in common was that the Z machine interpreter is basically stored in the first two sectors of the disk. That's basically just by observing where the where the random data stops or whatever. But yeah, so if you copy out the first two sectors from one of the Infocom disk images to a fresh disk image, that's kind of your first step, and that gets you the interpreter. And if you have an appropriate directory entry set up to point at those first two sectors, and then you could load in the file at that point and exec it. Of course, you still need to store a file, so let's not get ahead of ourselves. So that's but moving on, if you're using the version C or the version D of the interpreter, which I don't think you have to load those via the DOS command, but I assume that you want to be able to load them from the DOS command, just because that's what makes sense to me. I guess the first version of Zork I used was a self-booting version of Zork on DOS, so on MS-DOS. So anyway, booting like that makes sense to me for the CoCo too. The CoCo as well, I should say. Anyway, to enable the booting with the DOS command, you need to pick up the track 34 from the Infocom disk and lay it down on track 34 of your new disk image. If you look at the last blog entry of the series here, the one that's building Infocom disk images for CoCo, you'll see the DD command that I use that copies over the track 34. And so then the missing part is the story file. And so it turns out the story file just goes, if it's short enough, which means it has to be 64,512 bytes or less, it'll just go right after the interpreter. So starting on track 3, up to tracks 3 through 16, just one sector after the other, one byte down after the other through the sectors through the tracks. So you can just write the file down and you're pretty much done. If your story file is bigger than 64,512 bytes, then you need to cut it off at that length and put the rest of the file starting at track 18 and on through the up to track 30, through 33. Yeah, so then, so I suppose, well, yeah, so that should work. That's what I've done in my example. Comparing the original disk image to what I created for Ballyhoo, the only difference then was the directory entry, which in this case will be left completely empty. You'll just have to use DOS to boot the game. The original Ballyhoo disk from the archive does have a directory entry for a game.bin. You can copy over the directory track 17 with a command pretty similar to what I did for copying track 34. You'll just have to figure out the numbers to adjust it. That'll give you a game.bin that you can load in and exec. Or, you can create your own directory entry with the file namespace used to leave messages in there or whatever. That's up to you. Anyway, so again, I've got a blog entry. There's 3 blog entries that relate to this and hopefully are helpful to fill in anything you want to look up. Again, if you want to get cute, you can modify the directory entries so that when you type dir, you can have it say type DOS to boot or something like that. And how to do that, I'll leave as an exercise for the listener, I guess. Okay, so now I should mention, now this leaves a bit of a moral issue, because technically what I've just described to you how to do it is basically, well, in fact, it is a form of software piracy. Now, granted, we're talking about code that, to the extent that there's a notion of something called abandonware, this code would be it. It's probably still legally owned by Activision or whoever is the heir to Infocom. I doubt anyone's going to come after you for doing it, but there it is. Be aware. I would probably definitely advise against. Well, I would say consult with a lawyer, but I would not think that it would be appropriate for you to use this technique and then sell a game, a game image using it. But if you want to play games on your own, or if you want to, release some stuff to your friends or whatever, or maybe you can do some research and see what the legal status is of the Infocom interpreters. Maybe it's different than I know. But anyway, check into it. There is probably a moral issue here. On the other hand, the technique is not that hard to do. In fact, I actually produced a makefile to do it for what I was doing this summer. And so I probably could I'm sure I could change my makefile a little bit to accommodate what I've learned since then. But, so basically you're talking about, one command that could take your story file that you could distribute, and somebody could run one command and be able to play it on their CoCo. And so with that in mind, it'd be kind of cool if we could kickstart a little bit of use of Infocom games in the CoCo world. And if that happened, well, then theoretically somebody could write a new Z Machine interpreter. It's not really, I won't say it's not difficult because I haven't done it, but it doesn't look terribly difficult or unreasonable. You might even be able to use some existing portable interpreter code as a basis. I don't know how far you go with that, but it might be worth giving a look. But anyway, somebody could write a new interpreter, either strictly for the version 3 Z machines, or even for the later version 5 and above Z machines. Some of those have some interesting features. At some point they supported some graphics, I think some sound. So, I mean, that might be a cool project if you're looking for something longer term to do. And then anybody who has, in the meantime, been practicing with Inform, writing their interactive fiction, they could make use of your tool instead of having to borrow the Z Machine interpreter from an existing Infocom disk. But anyway, so I don't mean to bring you down there at the last. like I said, I think no one from Infocom is likely to come after you. But, before you do anything that is legally questionable, then definitely consult your own attorney, because I am not offering any form of legal advice here, or at all. I am not practicing law, I promise. So anyway, if you do want to check out other Infocom or Z Machine games and run them on your CoCo, well, the description I've just provided and or the information in the 3 blog posts that I will link to from the show notes will provide what I believe is enough information for you to be able to proceed with that and immerse yourself deeper into the world of interactive fiction. All right, well, I hope that was fun for you. It was kind of cool for me. So what else can we say? But, happy hacking, retro forever. All right, thanks.
Tandy keeps red, red like the brake key. Tandy keeps green, green like the TV. Tandy makes all of your dreams come true. Tandy's got the magic of CoCo too.
TRS-80 color computers are better than ever. We improved our most popular family computers with a compact white case, low-profile electric typewriter quality keyboard, and reduced the system price. Come see the new TRS-80 color computer too.
Tandy makes a product that's brand new. Tandy's got the magic. Tandy's got the magic. Tandy's got the magic of CoCo too.
Alright, CoCo Cruisers, welcome back to the Games Corner. On this edition, we have a very special guest, another fellow Canadian by the name of Mr. Reitveld. I reached out to Mr. Reitveld asking if he would like to do a quick review on a CoCo Infocom game, because embarrassing as it is to admit this, I've never played any Infocom games on the CoCo. The experience I have with Infocom games are the later ones on a PC with graphics and sound. However, with all this talk, I do plan to relive the past and play some of these excellent early iconic Infocom games. Okay, I won't hold you up any longer. Here is Mr. Reitveld's mini review. Please enjoy.
Last night I took a dive deep into danger. There was something down there. Something terrifying. I had to face it, because I knew that only I could save the Aquadome. With that, I dove deep into the Infocom classic, Sea Stalker. Sea Stalker is an early text adventure game that allows you to direct the plot and outcome and create your own visuals with just your imagination. So often a great adventure game has been ruined with someone else's hurried or uninspired graphics. Infocom's games don't suffer from this. They allow the player to imagine the character and the scenery in their own way. It's always interesting to talk to other players of the same game and find that their characters are shorter or taller or fatter, thinner, that the water is bluer or colder or even deeper. No two players will visually illustrate a text adventure the same way. That's the brilliance of Infocom's adventures. Infocom's 1984 game Sea Stalker is a simple text adventure that was designed for children, or the child in ourself. It accepts simple phrases that generate beautiful visuals in our own minds, and the puzzles that we must solve on the way can be easily understood by the most casual gamer of this genre. In Sea Stalker, the alarm sounds and your submarine stands waiting, but not so fast. You haven't even tested the sub in deep water, and the crew at the Aquadome may have a traitor in their ranks. So be careful. You have terrifying possibilities to consider, mysteries to unravel, life and death decisions to make. Success won't come easy, and it may not come at all, because every full sentence command that you type into your computer moves you farther into the awesome mysteries of the dark ocean, and every puzzle must be solved with brains and daring. If you want to become the main character of an unfolding undersea adventure, then this is the game for you.
Alright, CoCo Cruisers, welcome back to part 2 of this month's Games Corner. Once again, I'd like to give a huge thanks to Mr. Reitveld for doing a review on Sea Stalker by Infocom this month. And as I said before, I was a little later coming to computers, and the Infocom game I remember playing was Return to Zork on the PC that had full graphics and sound. And
It also had the point and click just like the Sierra AGI software. So this month I'm going to talk about a brand new game that is hot off the sheets. It was released earlier this month and is called Forest of Doom. It was created by a Canadian fellow. Is this another Canadian guy? Actually, we probably can call this a Canadian content of the show, I think, at the end of the podcast. Anyways, the game was created by a Canadian fellow named D. Bruce Moore, who I had the pleasure of meeting in person at CoCo Fest. An interesting thing to note about this game is that Bruce was working on it back in the 80s, and the project never got finished. Then suddenly, fast forward to 2016, and he got interested in the CoCo again. And luckily for us, he picked up his old project and finished this game. Forest of Doom requires a color computer 1, 2, or 3, and requires 32K of memory. The game will detect if it's running on a CoCo 3 and take advantage of it by running at a faster speed. Forest of Doom is a D&D style game where you build your character up by advancing through levels, gaining strength, collect gold, and different spells. It is text-based and features beautiful semi-graphic screens. For sound, it has X amount of beeps and X amount of bops in all the right places. In other words, no sounds to annoy you, but it does have just enough to keep you on your toes. This game is very addicting and well done. Even if you are not into this type of genre, it will pull you in and keep you entertained for hours. You never know what you will encounter wandering through the forest, and you will want to keep coming back for more. One of the really cool features about this game is when you buy it, you'll be mailed a book. That's right, this game comes with a book written for it. How cool is that, eh? I was definitely surprised when it showed up in the mail. Most games today on modern platforms don't come with anything. You're lucky if there's a small cardboard insert in the case. This book is a strategy and hint guide for Forest of Doom. The book also contains the actual digital download link for the game. Also a kind of cool way to prevent piracy, although I don't think that's what Bruce was aiming for with the release of this book. Well, there you have it. Another really fun game for your CoCo. I highly recommend picking up this game. Also very nice to support another programmer in the CoCo community. Great job, Bruce. I'm looking forward to your next release. Until next month, happy CoCo gaming.
The Dragon microcomputer was launched in the UK last year. Since then, we have developed a knowledge and mastery of the machine's capabilities. You can benefit from our experience by subscribing to Dragon User, which is expanding its coverage to include all US developments. Each issue of Dragon User contains reviews of the latest software, programming advice for beginners, hardware projects, program listings for games and utilities, reviews of Dragon peripherals, technical advisory service, programming articles for users. Dragon User is only $29.95 for 12 issues, airspeeded to US and Canada. Make the most of your new Dragon microcomputer with Dragon User, the international independent magazine for Dragon owners.
Well, we have reached the end of episode 30. Wow, episode 30. Seems strange even saying that. When we started this podcast, I certainly wasn't thinking about episode 30, that's for sure. And what a month it's been. With John and Boise's birthdays, our interview with Professor Moriarty, and a really cool tech segment on using the Z interpreter on a CoCo. Oh, and can't forget the American Thanksgiving. Or as John likes to tell me, it's the real Thanksgiving. As always, I'd like to thank our host John Linville for making it through those mega long news segments and providing us with another awesome tech segment. Also, I'd like to thank Mike Rowan for being a part of the show and making those really cool commercials and bumpers you hear. Also want to thank Boise for being a part of the show as well. I think you're a full-timer now. Big thanks goes out to Professor Moriarty for giving us some of your time to record the interview, and Mr. Reitveld for doing a mini review on Sea Stalker Infocom game. Last but not least, thank you all for listening and your support. Please feel free to send us feedback. We do like to hear from you. Until next month, go absolutely CoCo nuts and CoCo forever.